Welcome to my channel. What if Naruto reborn in Highschool DXD? With Power of Destruction Part 3 inches ugh. That feels really good. Naruto let out a loud groan. He was currently laying in the bed that belonged to the room he was assigned. Sitting on top of him, straddling his thighs, was Tamamo, who had offered him a massage after noticing how tense his muscles were. He had declined at first, but after a certain exercise during his late-night training he could practically feel his muscles lock up to the point he could barely move anything from his waist up. She had helped him make their way to his room before helping him discard of his shirt and slowly, very slowly lowered him onto the bed. After releasing another hiss from the feeling of her soft hands running over his muscled back, Naruto wondered why he had declined in the first place, as he hadn't felt this relaxed in a long time. "You're really good at this." His words came out as a hiss as she loosened up a certain knot around his left shoulder blade. Tamamo basked in the praise as she continued her actions. Using a small amount of magic on her fingertips, she simultaneously worked both his muscles and the spots she couldn't reach with her hands. She quite enjoyed doing this. The feel of his muscled back underneath her nimble fingers was something she took great delight in. The sound of his groans of relief each time she would hit certain spots, along with the compliments that came with it. After a while, and once she was sure she had gotten rid of all of the knots and tension in his back, she noticed his breathing had slowed down. Carefully she moved so she was no longer straddling him before laying down next to him. Before staring intently at her master's face, who wore an expression of serenity. Feeling a sudden weight next to him, Naruto turned his face sideways before slowly opening his eyes. Blue eyes met Amber as she watched him with a gaze filled with admiration. Slowly a smile crept onto his face as he moved his face closer to hers. He could see her cheeks flush, no doubt from the close proximity their faces were. Naruto lost his breath as he stared at her face, which was one of perfection. Behind her, rays of light belonging to the moon that managed to shine down upon her from the window did nothing but amplify her already immense beauty. The longer he stared at her, the more lost he got, as those warm amber orbs seemed to smother him. Moving his face closer, her cheeks got gradually more flushed before he surprised her by pecking her on her lips. Lips which he noted were very soft. Tamamo's eyes widened in shock as she stared at his now retreating face. It was quick, very quick, but she could still feel the lingering touch of his lips making contact with her own. Her tongue came out before she licked her own lips as slowly a beautiful smile formed. Did this mean he accepted her, that he liked her like she did to him? Naruto watched her smile, one so radiant and pure he was sure it could light up even the darkest places and cleanse even the most evil souls out there. Shifting his body slightly so he was lying on his side, he placed his arms around her before gently pulling her closer till her body rested against his. "You know," he started, his voice was slightly husky, making her tilt her head so she could look at him. "Despite knowing you for such a short time, I've come to really like you. I'm not sure what it is, but there's just something about you that makes me feel at ease." One of his hands moved away from her waist and instead began to slowly pet her fluffy tail. "Once I'm done here and with Amaterasu's approval, do you wish to travel with me? I really like you and would like to explore our relationship a bit more." As he finished speaking those words, he felt Tamamo bury her head into his chest and wrap her arms around him. "Yes, yes, yes, yes," she cheered, and Naruto couldn't help but return her embrace along with the joy she was radiating, which was very infectious. He. "Calm down, Tamamo, everything's okay." He rubbed her back with one of his hands before shifting once more, this time so he was lying on his back with Tamamo on top of him. He could see her tail swishing wildly in excitement behind her before it stopped and instead moved to the side and skillfully managed to pull the sheets over both of them. "Sleepy?" he asked, but could feel himself slowly drifting off to sleep as well. That massage she gave him was just so calming that he wished nothing more than a good night's rest. She gave a cute yawn before making herself comfortable on his chest. "Good night, Naruto-sama," Tamamo murmured before she fell asleep in his welcoming embrace. "Good night to you as well, Tamamo-chan," he returned while adding an affectionate suffix to her name. While he wasn't sure if she heard him, he'd like to think she did, if the small squeeze she gave him was an indication. "So this is the famed Naruto Bale, huh?" A feminine voice spoke to her companion to the side as they stood in the doorway, watching the two sleep. "Correct, Inari-chan," the other person said as she too watched them sleep. Tamamo, who was asleep on his chest, slowly rose and descending with each breath he took. He's quite handsome up close, though it seems like Tamamo-chan already has gotten her claws in him." "Yep, and it seems he's reciprocating her feelings. The two of them have been spending every day since he woke up together. She even begged me to let her take care of him when I first brought him here. Ah, young love, still, to think the person who saved little Tamamo all those years ago was a devil of all things." I was surprised as well when she recognized him before begging me to save him after watching the show he had put on. "By the way, have you heard anything from the underworld, Inari-chan?" Inari shook her head. "No, I haven't, Amaterasu-chan. The underworld has been on lockdown since the end of the war. Even I can't enter without using force, but that's not an option." Amaterasu frowned before changing the topic. "So, do you want to stay here and keep watching them, or is there a reason why you're here?" Well, I wouldn't mind keep watching him as he's the reason I came here. I wanted to see who captured Tamamo's heart after all the rejections you sent out to other pantheons who were interested in her. Speaking of which, are those Greeks still upset about that? Inari asked, recalling their interest in Tamamo to the point that they made it clear they wanted her. Despite Tamamo's polite decline, they kept on insisting till the point Amaterasu herself made it clear she was off limits with a show of power that got them to back off. It probably put a dent in the relationship between their pantheons, but Amaterasu stood her ground before threatening that if they came near Tamamo she would kill them and the rest of Olympus. Naturally, having the strongest Shinto goddess threaten you was enough to instill fear in even gods. A sudden groan grabbed both women's attention. Looking at the source of the sound, they saw Naruto slowly wake up as his eyes fluttered open. Both Amaterasu and Inari watched as he glanced downwards before he brought his hands up and proceeded to run his fingers through her hair. A small smile formed on his lips, unknown to the two, mimicking Tamamos whose fingers digged into his sides. "You really are adorable," he mumbled, still unaware of the two people watching them. "Oh my, you weren't lying when you said they were totally into each other, Ama-chan," Inari commented as she nudged the woman in her side. Naruto snapped his head towards their direction, his blue eyes making contact with Amaterasu's golden ones before moving on to the woman standing next to her and raised an eyebrow. The woman standing next to her was slightly shorter than Amaterasu and had long silver hair or white depending on how the lights were shining down upon her. Amber eyes much like Tamamo's own except with slitted pupils. What mainly got his attention were the pair of white fox ears she had on top of her head and the long 9 white tails that came out of her back and underneath the white kimono she wore. Focusing his senses on the woman, he noticed she had a similar aura to Amaterasu's own, which, taking in account where he was, made him have a good idea on who this woman was that seemed to be gazing intensely at him. "Inari, I take it?" he asked as he glanced at Amaterasu, who nodded in response. "Correct, Naruto-kun, she came to here to see you." Inari took the opportunity to enter the room and casually made her way towards him, humming along the way as her eyes stayed on his form. Naruto was getting somewhat uncomfortable by her scrutinizing stare and looked at Amaterasu for help. The goddess merely smirked as she proceeded to watch how things will play out. "Oh my, such power I can sense inside of you, even larger than our own." Inari finally spoke up as she stopped at the foot of the bed. "So potent and wild, like it could explode out of you any moment." She licked her lips as she stared at his uncovered chest where Tamamo's head was resting. "I have to say I'm quite jealous. I wouldn't mind trading places with Tamamo-chan right now." Naruto blushed at both her words and her hungry stare. Thankfully he was saved as at that moment Tamamo had decided to wake up. "Morning, Naruto-sama," she chirped before letting loose a cute yawn. "Good morning, Tamamo." He returned her greeting as he saw her tail rise and began to sway from side to side in response to his fingers that were still running through her soft hair. Glancing between Tamamo's tail and Inari's, he noticed that her single one was much thicker looking. Noticing him looking at something or someone else, Tamamo looked at where he was staring before her eyes widened as she sat and she quickly bowed her head. "Ah, Inari-sama, relax, Tamamo-chan, didn't I tell you to ease up on the sama stuff?" The woman pouted at Tamamo, who sheepishly began to play with her own tail. Anyway, Amaterasu clapped her hands together and managed to get everyone to focus on her. "How about we let these two lovebirds alone for a moment so they can refresh themselves, as I have something to talk with both of you about." Both blushed at her words while Inari complied with Amaterasu's request, though she sent a wink at Naruto, who paid her no attention as instead he was focused on Tamamo, who was straddling him though seemingly unaware. She jumped lightly upon feeling his hands rest on her bare thighs just above the blue stockings she wore. "Hey, sorry Tamamo," he chuckled at her pouting expression and blushing cheeks. "Well, let's get ourselves ready, Tamamo, wouldn't want to upset Amaterasu now." Quickly Tamamo got off of him, though she had her head down as her blush was still present. "Do you want me to wait here till you are done, or?" he asked her as he motioned to the location of the bathroom. "Ah, it's fine, Naruto-sama, you can come as well." Giving Tamamo a thankful nod, he got out of bed before following her inside the bathroom, where both cleaned themselves before locating Amaterasu, who wished to speak with them. Not even a half hour later, Naruto along with Tamamo were seated in what he presumed was Amaterasu's office. Sitting behind her desk opposite of them was Amaterasu, with Inari standing by her side. Both goddesses held an serious expression quite opposite of the usual carefree one they sported, and it made Naruto turn serious as well. Tamamo on the other hand seemed oblivious to the apparent tension that was in the air, as instead of paying attention to either goddess she was currently completely focused on Naruto instead. "So how about we get started?" Amaterasu began as she looked at Naruto. "Naruto-kun, I'm afraid to tell you that the underworld is currently in lockdown. I didn't quite believe so myself when Inari first told me, but it has been confirmed that nobody can go in or out. I honestly have no idea why this is happening, so I can't help you any further with that." "I see," Naruto replied after a moment of silence. "Honestly, I'm not all that bothered with that. I'm not really looking forward to heading back down there. Lots and lots of bad memories are all that I will find there. I don't really have anyone waiting for me either. Like, They can live without me. My father knows I'm alive, which is all that matters, so they won't waste resources looking for me. Sirex and the rest can take care of themselves. Aside from them, there's not really anyone else I'm familiar with on a level that warrants for me to return." He scratched his cheek before a scowl formed on his face. "Not to mention that if I were to return, no doubt the elders will keep pressuring me about when I'll get married or produce some offspring. TCH, those greedy assholes don't understand the meaning of no, regardless of how many I tell them." Unnoticed by him but not the goddesses, Tamamo narrowed her eyes in distaste of the idea of him getting married. "Oh my, she's quite protective of him already," both thought as they shared a look with the other before smirking in amusement. "Which brings me to something I would like to ask from you." Here he locked eyes with Amaterasu, blue eyes making contact with golden as he leaned slightly forward. After all of this, he waved his hand around. "Was over. I was planning on traveling around. You know, discovering new places, meeting new people, just all kind of things to get my mind away from everything that has happened. The war, the underworld and all those things which give me nothing but bad memories. And, well, I was wondering if you would allow Tamamo to travel with me." Here he reached down before grasping Tamamo's hand in his, ignoring her blush at the sudden contact. "I've grown quite fond of her over the weeks that I've been here in your care. I want to see if our relationship can grow into something more, you know. We can both see that she's completely in love with me and I want to return those feelings as well. She's everything I could ask for in a partner. Sure, those devils downstairs will probably be upset with the pure blood crap, but I never cared about their ramblings and let's be honest, they can't force me. So, what do you say?" Amaterasu closed her eyes as he finished speaking. She processed the words just spoken to her and suppressed the urge to smile as Naruto had finally admitted to liking Tamamo. She felt happy for her. After all these years, Tamamo finally found the person that had stolen her heart, a person whom she could see was good for her. A match made in heaven, so to say. Well, except that Naruto was a devil. She wanted nothing more than for the two of them to get together. Oh, she could already imagine what their children would look like. However, Amaterasu had an offer for both of them. Something she had been thinking about ever since he had arrived here in Takamagahara. An offer that would please both of them. So with that she opened her eyes. "I see nothing wrong with that. In fact, I fully support your interest in traveling the world with Tamamo. But, I have an offer to make you that might interest you both. One that helps both you and me." "An offer," Naruto repeated with an raised eyebrow, absent-mindedly enjoying Tamamo's fingers which were trailing circles on his hand as he hadn't let go of her. What might this offer be? Here Amaterasu leaned forward, fingers intertwined and hands resting just before her lips as she hummed. "Yes, an offer. I want you two to work for me." She raised an hand signaling she wasn't finished. "Before you reply, let me explain what I mean by that. By working for me I mean that you are allowed to travel with Tamamo, but I will, on occasion or whenever required, ask you two to do something for me. Whether this is to check somewhere to make sure everything is going okay. To represent me for when I'm unavailable. To capture someone, be they devil, angel, fallen or somebody else should they pose a threat. And last but not least, to act as my guards when I have to attend certain meetings. That is what I'm asking of you. I don't mind really. It would be nice to do, well, something else every now and then. I also enjoy staying here as it's just so peaceful and really clears my mind. Not to mention that it aligns with my interest in traveling and meeting new people. So I'm fine with it as long as Tamamo is too." Naruto replied without a moment wasted. Said Kitsune perked up as the attention shifted from him to her. I wouldn't mind either, Naruto-sama. If you think it's okay then I think so as well," she answered after a moment. Naruto didn't show it, but inwardly he pouted at her submissive behavior at how she agreed to whatever he asked. Something to work on during their travels, he mused. Make her more independent and willing to form her own choices when asked something. But for now it was okay. She was most likely still getting used to him being more affectionate and that he wanted to return her feelings. Hearing her answer, he turned back to Amaterasu. "There you go, we both accept your offer." "Great. When will you be leaving so I can get some things ready to take with you?" "Just some papers so you two will be able to represent me without any trouble when necessary." Naruto furrowed his eyebrows as he thought about it. Glancing at Tamamo, he saw her shrug at him, indicating that she was fine whenever he wanted to leave. Finally, after thinking about it, he answered, "We'll stay here for another week before heading off. Mainly so Tamamo can say goodbyes, as it is harder for her to leave since she has been living here for several decades." Tamamo blushed at his words and the fact that he cared enough about her that he was willing to give her time. It felt nice to be treated like this. A feeling she could get used to. "Thank you, Naruto-sama," she spoke softly. "You're welcome, Tamamo-chan," he replied softly with a bright smile. Her eyes widened at the affectionate suffix he added to her name, something he seemingly was unaware of. Her mind vaguely recalling having heard him call her that before, but the memory was foggy, so she was unsure. Regardless though, and judging by the smiles Amaterasu and Inari sported, they heard it as well, the former even giving her a thumbs up while nodding her head. Her already fast-beating heart increased in pace as he stood up and brought her along. He pulled her close to him, their hands still locked together as he stared at her from the corner of his eyes. He smiled at her, which she returned before watching as his face leaned closer to hers. She understood what was going to happen after experiencing this before, and closer her eyes. Just as her eyes closed, she felt his lips make contact with her cheek before, just like before, he pulled back, eyes opening as her amber orbs gazed at him with such adoration. Naruto couldn't help himself as he pulled her closer to his own body. The hand which previously held her hand was now placed around her waist. She blushed at the contact but did nothing except lean closer to him as his body gave off an welcoming warmth. Probably because he was half phoenix, as she knew even Yukai didn't give off half the heat he was unconsciously releasing. The two left the office, leaving behind Amaterasu and Inari, the latter of which sent a questioning look to her friend as she sat down on the desk. Now Amaterasu, what are you planning? What do you mean, Inari-chan? Amaterasu replied while feigning ignorance, which did not work in the slightest. Pouting at her friend's behavior, she spoke. You know what I'm talking about. Is it smart to let them act in your stead? Ah, I see what you mean. I can tell you right now, Inari, that I have my utmost trust in Naruto. You saw it as well, didn't you? All he wants is to stay away from the underworld, possibly from any obligations he might have. You might not have seen it, but I did. She looked her fellow goddess in the eyes. He's tired, Inari-chan. For someone as him who's practically immortal to lose their will to live, I can't imagine what it's like. Tamamo is his light, she's what's stopping him from going down a path nobody wants. The offer I gave them helps both of us. It keeps them from getting bored, as while I'm sure they'll be traveling a lot, eventually that gets stale. Aside from that, it allows me to see Tamamo as I care about her deeply. Lastly, we gain a powerful ally with Naruto. You might not have seen it, but I did, and I can tell you right now his power is beyond anything I have seen before. Even from this far, both Tamamo and I could feel his energy reach us. Inari. The dragons themselves stated that Naruto-kun and Sirex are by far the strongest devils that have lived. With the biblical god now dead, the devils are currently the strongest of the three big factions, and I doubt that will change anytime soon, if ever. She looked to see if she was still paying attention before continuing. When she did, we both could see Naruto-kun is destined for great things. What those might be, who knows, but I want him on friendly terms when that happens, and what better way to have them work with us. Inari mulled over what she was just told before slowly nodding. And what about Tamamo? Where does she exactly fit in all of this? Yes, I know what you said before, but there has to be more to it. Amaterasu smiled. Of course, Tamamo being almost raised by me, I've come to see the young Kitsune as a daughter of sorts. While she's also a Yukai, she doesn't have any ties with the faction aside from being one, of course. An union between Tamamo and a powerful devil such as Naruto will help us make ties with devils in general, while also keeping away any potential enemies. After all, anyone would think twice about fighting him if not abstaining against an opponent capable of even defeating gods. Oh my, you've really thought this through, didn't you? Don't get me wrong, I truly care about Tamamo and wish the two together even without any planning, but this helps us Shinto gods as well. A win-win situation, I'd say. Inari hummed but could see her point. I was skeptical at first, but now I can see where you're coming from. Let's just hope it doesn't bite us in the ass. It won't, Amaterasu replied confidently. I saw for a brief moment his eyes narrowing. No doubt he knows what I'm planning, or at least a part of it. He didn't say anything about it though. Why? Even I'm not sure, to be honest. Perhaps because he doesn't mind, or because he knows that when it comes to it there's not much we can do. Or he could do it to please Tamamo, as he knows she cares a lot about me and in proxy our pantheon. As she finished speaking, Inari hopped off of Amaterasu's desk before walking towards the door. It was nice speaking to you, Ama-chan. Unfortunately though, I have an important appointment in Kyoto regarding internal matters that require my attention. I'll be sure to drop by a few times this week and try to talk a bit more with Naruto and attempt to form some sort of relationship, as I'm sure my earlier actions didn't help to paint me in a good picture. No. They did not. Amaterasu deadpanned at her before Inari shrugged her shoulders and left her alone inside her office. She sighed as she leaned back in the chair she was sitting on before retrieving several papers. Now, time to get those papers ready for both of them. She mumbled with a frown as she got to work. She'd rather see what those two were up to, but alas, the trouble of being a goddess. Are you alright? Naruto asked with concern, lacing his voice as he sat down onto the bed next to Tamamo, who was staring at her hands. Oh, yes, I'm fine, Naruto-sama, she replied after a moment before she went back to staring at her hands. Naruto frowned as he didn't believe her for a second. Never before had she not immediately replied to anything he asked her, as usually all her attention was on him. So hearing her silent for even a moment was enough to warrant his concern, as he had quickly sat down with her. After a moment of silence, Naruto had enough and wrapped his arms around her before lifting her up and placing her in his lap. His arms circled her waist as he made sure not to hurt her tail. Come on Tamamo-chan, I don't believe you for a second. You normally never wait to answer my questions. So tell me what's wrong. Is it me or does it have anything to do with leaving Takamagahara? She stiffened in his grasp for a brief moment, but it was enough to know he was correct. Naruto sighed as he removed one of his hands in favor for running it through his hair. He wondered what he was supposed to say to make her stop sulking. He did not like this version of Tamamo. He preferred the cheerful, bubbly and sometimes even goofy Tamamo, as he himself couldn't feel depressed seeing her like this. Her mood affected his own more than he realized. Deciding to be bold and seeing it as the quickest way to get rid of her depression, he turned her in his lap before planting his lips on her. Caught off guard by the sudden movement, Tamamo had no time to react as something slightly moist and soft impacted with her lips. She blinked before her amber eyes widened as they stared into cerulean blue before they trailed down to his lips. His lips that were now connected to her own. She felt one of his hands tenderly run across her tail while the other rested on the small of her back. This kiss, it was different from before. She could feel the emotions he was conveying through their lip lock. It was intense, overwhelming even as she closed her eyes and felt him deepen the kiss. It was everything she imagined and more. Eventually though, and much to her displeasure, he broke their lip lock and she leaned back. Her hands were resting on his shoulders as she sent him a confused look and pouted with her now slightly swollen pink lips. Don't sulk, it doesn't suit you. He gently scolded her before leaning closer once more and pecked her on her nose. We can always return here whenever you want or feel homesick. I don't mind as long as it makes you happy, okay? Tamamo stared at him for a moment before she slowly nodded. Her tail wrapped itself around him from behind her and he couldn't help but laugh softly at the fluffy appendage which seemed to have a mind of its own. You want to do something today, or are we just going to stay like this? Not that I mind or anything, he mumbled as he held her close. Her fox ears twitched at the feel of his hot breath as her head was resting against his chest. I don't mind either, Naruto-sama. Though I would like to stay like this for at least a bit longer. That's fine with me, my dear Kitsune. He twisted himself around slightly before allowing himself to fall onto the bed. Tamamo was brought with him but didn't seem to mind, as she was content as long as he would hold her like he did. And hold her he did, as for the rest of the day they stayed like this. Just taking comfort in the other's presence and the knowledge they cared for another. Finally it was time. A week had passed and now Tamamo and Naruto were ready to leave. Tamamo had spent most of the week in company of Amaterasu, with Naruto tagging along every now and then. Aside from that, he would occasionally hang out with Inari whenever she would drop by. Amaterasu had finished and handed over all the papers that they would be needing, and Naruto made sure to keep it in a safe place, which happened to be a pocket dimension he was able to form with the help of the goddess, as it had to do with all sorts of kanji he was not familiar with. Though he couldn't be blamed, as Amaterasu herself told him it was Shinto magic which made use of kanji placed in certain spots to form a formula and allowed the user to do incredible things. From controlling elements to making barriers and even personal dimensions, pocket dimensions like he had done. It pretty much depended on the person's imagination. Unfortunately though, it was also one of the harder branches of magic, and Naruto had to agree, as he was shown several pieces of work which looked more like art if he had to be honest. Tamamo apparently was well versed in that branch of magic, and he wondered if she would be willing to teach him about it during their travels. Snapping out of his thought, his eyes moved to his companion, who was currently being smothered by the sun goddess. Though, judging from how her tail was happily swaying from side to side, she seemed to be enjoying it. After a moment of embracing the other, Amaterasu was the first one to break their embrace, as she still held her hands. It's time, Tamamo. Remember that you two are always welcome to visit when you wish to, so don't be a stranger, alright? I can see Naruto cares a lot about you, and that goes likewise for you. So make sure to look out for another, okay? Oh, while I'm sure you two would make cute babies, I think it would be best if you would wait with that for a while. Her last sentence had both Naruto and Tamamo blushing, which caused her to smirk. No, but seriously, I'm not ready to become a grandmother. Her tone conveying her words as she sent Naruto a narrowed-eyed look. Letting go of Tamamo, she took a few steps before stopping in front of Naruto, who had to look down in order to make eye contact with her. If I hear that you made Tamamo-chan cry, we will have problems regardless of your strength, okay? She finished by poking him in the chest, absent-mindedly noticing how muscled he really was. While she had seen him shirtless, only Tamamo had actually gotten to feel just how hard they actually felt. Naruto looked amused by her threat but nodded nonetheless. You have my word that I will do my utmost best to take care of Tamamo and protect her with my life, he said with conviction as they locked gazes for a few seconds. Seemingly satisfied with what she saw, her gaze softened before she pulled him in a hug as well, successfully surprising him before he quickly hugged her back. It's time, she mumbled before she reluctantly let go and stepped back as Tamamo took her place next to Naruto. He placed her hand in his own before a glow encompassed their forms, which slowly got brighter and brighter before it was gone, and so were the two people who stood previously before her. She stared at the spot they previously occupied for a while before releasing a sigh. They were gone, back on Earth for now. She turned around and made her way back in her temple, humming along the way. They were not even a minute gone yet she already missed both of them. Blue eyes peered into the morning sun, which slowly began to rise as it started illuminating the earth in a warm morning glow. The way it shone light down upon the snow and in turn giving it the appearance like he was looking at an endless field of diamonds made for an amazing sight. The sound of feet shuffling across the floor reached his ears, yet he didn't move. His eyes kept focused on the orange ball in the distance that broke through the early clouds even as he felt a smaller body press up against him. "Morning, Tamamo-chan, you're up early," Naruto eventually said as he turned his head slightly and greeted her. However, as he turned to the side, he was treated to the sight of Tamamo completely covered in blankets, with the exceptions being her face and her tail that peeked out from behind. "Cute," he mumbled, which she heard as she tightened the covers around her in an attempt to hide herself. Chuckling softly, he wrapped an arm around her as he held her close, using his abnormal body heat to keep her warm and comfortable. "Say, Tamamo." Said woman looked up from his comforting hold he had over her, curiosity twinkling in her amber eyes. "How long has it been since we've been gone, since we've last seen Amaterasu?" "I'm not sure, Naruto-kun," she mumbled against him, and he smiled at the suffix added to his name. It took him a while, but eventually he managed to get her to stop adding the "sama" suffix behind his name. Though it was mostly due to his insistence when they officially began dating, as he didn't like her addressing him as her master but rather her partner, her companion. "I see." He leaned down and kissed the part of her face that was visible. "How about you go back to bed? I can tell you're still tired and I'll join you in a bit." Tamamo opened her mouth to reply, only for her to let out a cute yawn instead. "Oh, okay." She turned around, her bushy tail softly tracing his face as she released soft giggles before she went back inside. Once he was left alone, he took a deep breath as he could feel the sun peering down at him. Obviously Amaterasu used it as a medium to listen in on their conversation. "We'll be there sometime later." He waved lazily at the sun before he turned around and got ready to join Tamamo, who had probably fallen back to sleep. It was later in the day as Naruto and Tamamo exited the inn they had been staying in for the past couple of days. Naruto took a deep breath of fresh air, which in turn turned visible with the cold temperature outside. He frowned as he looked to his side where Tamamo stood. She wore her usual blue witchcraft clothes with over it a long and thick fur coat in order to keep her warm. "Are you sure you're not cold?" he asked her with concern. Despite her being a yokai, she could still feel cold, unlike him who could have just worn a sleeveless shirt if he wished to. Though he didn't, as it would only get them unwanted attention if he were to walk around in a t-shirt in sub-freezing temperatures outside, so he had settled on wearing a kimono. I'm fine," she replied with slight stutter as she shivered from underneath the hood she had put on to preserve as much heat as she could. Naruto frowned at the blatant lie but didn't say a thing. He knew she was trying to appear tough, and if she wanted to, who was he to stop her? He would make sure to step in if it became too much for her though. Pulling her close, they walked a couple hundred feet, just enough to be far away from the inn and any people, as a teleportation circle formed underneath them. It glowed for a second before the two were gone. Tamamo blinked as they appeared in the familiar surroundings of Takamagahara. A smile formed as Amaterasu stood there waiting for them. The goddess wasted no time as she made her way over and pulled her in a hug. "Tamamo, oh how I've missed you." Amaterasu squealed as Tamamo was quickly overwhelmed by the woman's enthusiasm. Naruto watched with thin-veiled amusement as Amaterasu shook his companion around. Deciding enough was enough, he stepped forward. "Amaterasu, would you mind releasing her? I don't think she'll last much longer otherwise." Hearing his warning, she quickly let go of Tamamo, who hastily stepped closer to Naruto, who patted her between her ears as the hood she wore had come off during the greeting. "Well then," Amaterasu cleared her throat once. "It's great to see you both. Neither of you have aged a day since last time." She joked, which was met with two deadpan stares, making her blush in embarrassment. "Seeing as my humor isn't appreciated, I'll get straight to the point, I guess. Tamamo-chan, can you go ahead? There's certain things I need to talk with your boyfriend about." A blush formed on her cheeks at how she addressed Naruto, still not completely used to how others labeled their relationship. "Oh okay, Amaterasu-sama." She left before said goddess could scold her for using the "sama" suffix. Once she made sure she was nowhere near them, Amaterasu turned around, a serious expression having appeared on her face. "Say, Naruto-kun, have you been paying attention to what has happened in the underworld the past few years?" she asked him. Naruto raised an eyebrow before shaking his head negative. "No, I haven't." "Why? I have no interest in what's going on down there, and I'm pretty sure I told you that before." "You did, but..." Amaterasu glanced nervously at him. "I still think it's important for you to know what has been going on since the last time you've been there." "Ugh. Very well, I guess some knowledge wouldn't hurt," he reasoned with a heavy sigh. Amaterasu smiled. "Yes, well, let's start with the reason the underworld was in a lockdown those years ago." Naruto raised an eyebrow, showing he was indeed interested in knowing the cause. Apparently, shortly after the war ended, a civil war started amongst the devils. From what I understand, after the death of God and the 4 Satans, a ceasefire was declared as the original reason for the war had been killed. Both heaven and underworld agreed, which automatically made the fallen agree as well. While most were happy the war was over, others were not. Those who weren't were descendants of the original Satans who wished to continue, as without God on their side heaven would stand no chance, especially against the likes of Syrex and yourself, though you weren't there. This caused a divide between the devils, where there was one side who wished for peace and was named the New Satan faction, against those who wished to continue their conquest, whom were labeled as Old Satan faction. Here is where it gets interesting. Leading the New Satan faction were none other than Syrex, Seraphal, Ajuka and Falbium, due to their immense demonic energy compared to other devils. Together those 4 lead their faction to victory by killing all remaining descendants who wished to continue, with the exception a couple that managed to escape the apparent slaughter. It was evident which side was going to win from the beginning, given that Ajuka and Syrex are on a completely different level compared to even Seraphal, who already is one of the strongest devils alive. After the civil war ended with the New Satan faction coming out victorious, new Satans were chosen. I'm sure you can already guess who they picked. Amaterasu asked, and he nodded. Syrex, Ajuka, Seraphal and Falbium, though the latter might be wrong, as I remember the man being too lazy for a position like that one. Amaterasu giggled. No, you're correct, Naruto-kun. Syrex is the new Lucifer, yes, Lucifer. He no longer is the heir to the Gremori family. Ajuka is the new Beelzebub, Seraphal is the new Leviathan, and Falbium the new Asmodeus. I see, that's interesting, I guess. Wonder what would have happened had I been there as well. Ah yes, speaking of that, Amaterasu began nervously. It seems that my message I sent to Lord Baal wasn't received due to the civil war happening during that time. Syrex, once he was given the position as Lucifer, wasted no time and has sent out numerous search parties to look for you on insistence of your father. She sighed softly. They want you back, Naruto-kun. You're very valuable both as the heir of the Baal clan and your unique abilities. I'm sure they want you to reproduce already, especially with the loss of several devil houses due to the war, and in their eyes you're too powerful to be missing. They know you are still out there, and rumors have it elders are pressuring Syrex into putting you on a wanted list for abandoning your duty. TCH, how typical of them. Those old men shouldn't put their nose in other people's business, or one of these days it's going to cost them. He muttered in annoyance. Amaterasu grabbed his hand with her own and began to softly rub circles with her thumb in an attempt to calm him. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the gesture but didn't move away, as it was actually working. Taking a few breaths to quell his rising anger, he looked at the woman holding his hand. What do you suggest I do? I can't really barge in the underworld. Actually I can, but I doubt that'll be a good idea. I could try to talk to my father, but knowing him he would be against it and try his hardest to get me to accept the leadership of the clan and subsequently get some pure-blooded devil to marry me, and I don't want that. You know the Baal clan is all about pure blood, and I can already see what will happen once they see that Tamamo, who I love, is anything but a devil. It will no doubt ruin our reputation, and I can't do that, ugh. This is so frustrating, he growled out, not to mention that I wouldn't put it past those pesky elders to hire someone to assassinate Tamamo when I'm not around. You know, I haven't sensed any devils in a while, to be honest, which is weird since they apparently are looking for me, and last time I checked it wasn't very hard to sense my enormous magic reserves even with me actively suppressing them as much as I can. Amaterasu hummed in though before her eyes lit up as she looked at him with an idea what might have caused it. It might have something to do with Tamamo, whose scent is overpowering yours. I'm also actively aiding you with hiding your signature, something Inari-chan suggested, as long as you're in Japan, which is how far my influence can reach. Really, I knew you could use the sun as a medium of sorts, but not what exactly you were capable of. Let's head inside and continue our little conversation. Inari should be present as well, as she looked forward to seeing you again. While there we can discuss why I called you here for as well. Seeing no reason to decline her, he shrugged before motioning for her to lead. Neither noticing that she was still holding his hand with her own. Really, sounds like you two had a lot of fun. Inari commented as she along with Amaterasu listened to both of them tell stories what happened during their travels. Though those stories made Amaterasu remember something else she'd like to address. Ah, Naruto-kun. The blonde looked at her with a raised eyebrow before signaling for her to continue. Can you please explain why the Greek pantheon is demanding your head for something that has happened between you and Ares? Naruto narrowed his eyes in thought as he tried to remember what might have happened between them. Both Inari and Amaterasu watched as his blue eyes quickly turned cold and a shiver went down their spine due to it. Tamamo had a frown as she too remembered that man and what he tried to do as she unconsciously pressed herself a tad bit closer to him. Are you sure that's what they want? The way he asked the question made it clear that a wrong move was all that it would take to get on his bad side. Why yes. Amaterasu shook her head as she scolded herself for stuttering. That's what they wanted, no demanded from me or else. Or else what? Nothing, that's how they worded it. Naruto scoffed. Ho, well that's not going to happen anytime soon. Ares had it coming as the arrogant fucker tried to force Tamamo into doing something she did not want to. Hey, fool thought he would stand a chance against me. He chuckled amused. You should have seen him once I was done with him. Cocky little brat could barely be recognized even with his advanced healing. I was honestly debating on whether or not I should kill him then and there, but luckily for him Tamamo was able to stop me. He turned serious as he stared straight at Amaterasu. Tell Zeus or whomever that if he wants my head, so to speak, he should get it himself, though I might blow up Olympus on accident. And if I see Ares once more, I will eradicate him from existence along with every time he reforms. His voice reflected his eyes, which were almost capable of freezing the goddess of the sun herself. That thunderhead isn't capable doing so himself, as everyone knows Hades is the strongest of the Greek gods, so unless he comes down here personally, I'll let him throw his little temper tantrum up there. I see. I will let them know that that's your answer. Good. For good measure, feel free to let them know just who it is they are having this little spat with, so they know I can make my threat a reality. He clapped his hands together as the tension that had formed during his little speech disappeared. Now, how about you tell us why you wanted us here? Oh yes, I almost forget, he. Amaterasu chuckled as the rest suite dropped at her. In a few days I will be heading out to Kyoto to discuss certain agreements in order to continue giving the Yukai our support. Inari will be with me as well, though I'd like for you two to come with me too. It will be a good opportunity to have Tamamo meet other Yukai and introduce you two properly. Naruto and Tamamo shared a glance before the former turned to the sun goddess. That's fine with us. To be honest, we were planning on heading to Kyoto next, so this works out perfectly. Good. Amaterasu murmured. How about you two head out to your room? It's the same one as you had last time you've been here while I get someone to prepare us some food. I'm sure you're all quite hungry. As if that was some unseen signal, Naruto's stomach made itself known as it growled, much to his embarrassment. Fine. Actually, he looked at Tamamo. How about you go ahead? I have some personal things to ask these two. Tamamo looked at him for a moment before nodding her head. Okay, don't be gone for too long, all right. Naruto nodded back before kissing her on the lips, earning a smile from her as she stood up and walked off. What did you want to ask us? Inari spoke up as her ivory tails casually swayed behind her. Naruto took a deep breath before he began explaining about these weird dreams he had been experiencing the past months. I had these type of dreams, if not outright nightmares, before, haunting me for years, but eventually went away after meeting Tamamo. I had nothing but pleasant nights of sleep for a long time with her next to me, but out of nowhere it suddenly changed. He frowned before continuing. I find myself suddenly awake in this endless white room. I guess that's how I would describe it. Anyway, the problem is that each time I'm not alone. There's this man, he's old, or at least appears old. He has pale skin with shoulder-length, spiky brown hair and horns protruding from his forehead. Yeah, I'm not sure either, but aside from that he's clad in a long white kimono with several black magatama around the collar. Though the most interesting feature are the man's eyes. They're purple with rings, or rather ripples, in them. What bothers me the most is the man's stare, which is always focused on me. It's like he's sorry for something while at the same time expectant. He looked at both Inari and Amaterasu to see both paying rapt attention to his words. That's pretty much all there is. I don't know who he is, and I know I've never seen someone like that man before, as his unique features would make it hard to forget. So I'm asking if either of you know who this person is, as from his appearance I would have guessed he'd belong to the Shinto pantheon. The two goddesses were silent for a moment before Inari spoke. Naruto-kun, did this person ever told you his name? He shook his head. No, all he did was stare at me with those weird eyes of his. Inari and Naruto blinked before looking to her left, where Amaterasu was, who had gotten quiet all of a sudden. Ama-chan, is everything alright? Inari's voice shook her out of her trance. Yes, why? She tried to act as normal as she could, but it failed spectacularly. I have to look over something I almost forgot. Whoops. She quickly withdrew herself as she walked off. Both Devil and Kyuubi looked at another with confusion visible in their eyes on what just happened. I'm going to check up on Amaterasu, she drawled before quickly running after her. He stared at her retreating form for a few seconds before making his way to where he could sense Tamamo was at. A couple days later, Amaterasu, Inari, Naruto and Tamamo could be seen entering Kyoto. It had been a few days since Amaterasu's weird behavior, though she returned to her usual self by the time dinner was served. Naruto had no idea why she had acted that way, but knew Inari had helped in getting her to act normal. Aside from that, Naruto and Tamamo had spent the days just hanging out with both goddesses, who enjoyed their company. Though they both had to endure their endless teasing about when they were going to get married and when they could expect babies. So now they were here in Kyoto, Naruto having suppressed his demonic energy to the best of his ability on Inari's advice, as Yukai aren't too fond of other races with the exception of humans. Halt. Who are you? A muffled, male voice spoke up as a pair of armored guards walked up to their small group. Amaterasu Omakami and Inari Okami here to discuss arrangements with Kurama Dono. Upon mentioning the names, both guards immediately bowed their heads. Forgive us for not recognizing you, Amaterasu Dono, Inari Dono, they pleaded. Both women laughed softly before motioning them to stand. Please, it's all right. We didn't send out a notice in advance, so neither of us will blame you. The guards sighed in relief before their suspicion returned in full force as they eyed the couple standing behind them. The male more so, as they could sense a faint demonic aura coming from him, whereas the woman next to him smelled of kitsune and both could sense chakra from her. What is a devil doing here? They asked, or rather demanded, and looked at either goddess for answer. Please calm yourself. They're here as visitors while the man is my guard. Hearing Amaterasu's words, they turned their attention back to the blonde male of the group, who upon noticing the disbelieving gaze briefly stopped suppressing his energy and let his presence wash all over them. Naruto took silent pleasure in watching both guards almost fall to their knees as their senses were being assaulted by more demonic energy either had felt in their life. A nudge to his side courtesy of Tamamo got him to suppress his power back to where it was barely noticeable as both guards staggered to their feet. The grip on their weapons tightened after that experience, and their looks of disbelief were replaced by one of fear. Sorry for that, he doesn't like when somebody questions his capabilities. Inari apologized for him. Would you willing to let us enter, please? Why, yes. Both bowed once more. We will notify Kurama Dono of your presence here in Kyoto. I would like for you to keep your guard closed, as not many yokai are a fan of devils. Amaterasu waved his concerns off. That won't be a problem, right, Naruto? Yes, Amaterasu. Naruto spoke up for the first time. As your guard, I need to stay close to you anyway. Satisfied, Amaterasu gave both guards a smile as they parted the way for them to enter. Once they were out of view, they looked at another. Sent a message to Kurama Dono and the other guards to keep an eye on the devil, but make sure none of them attempts anything. I doubt we can survive if someone were to foolishly attack him. Not after feeling his power. I still feel my legs shaking. The other man wasted no time as he nodded before walking inside a small booth nearby and sent out a message using a small bird. As the group of four walked through the streets of Kyoto, they quickly caught the attention of everyone there. Though the attention went mainly to Naruto, who stood out the most with his sun-kissed blonde hair and the fact that he was a few inches taller than anyone they walked past. Murmurs spread amongst the numerous yokai as they could sense his suppressed demonic energy, though most were focused more on the kitsune yokai who had her fingers intertwined with his. Though she only had a single tail, Tamamo was much more powerful than any single-tailed kitsune would or could ever be. Something others had noticed as they watched her big and fluffy tail peek out beneath her fur coat. She wore her hood, which kept her face hidden, with only a few strands of her peach-pink hair being shown. A few remarks were made towards the two, as yokai devil couples were practically unheard of. Yokai could be even more elite with regards to how pure their blood was than devils, if that was possible. They kept the distance from the three big factions, and even human yokai couples were rare to see and often looked down on. Feeling Tamamo increase her grip on his hand, he glared at some of the people looking at them. His eyes flashing from blue to red as he released a small, in his opinion at least, pulse of demonic energy, enough for the yokai to feel a shiver run down their spine. Tamamo smiled as she felt him press her closer to him. She let her tail wrap around him before they continued their walk towards an inn. Amaterasu told them they would stay at for as long as they would be here. After a few more minutes of walking, they arrived at an inn before entering. Amaterasu and Inari first, with them quickly behind. Upon entering, they immediately noticed how warm it was compared to outside, and Tamamo quickly pulled back the hood she had over her head, allowing everyone to see her face. Her pink hair that flowed freely and perfectly framed her face, along with the orange fox ears that peeked out of her hair on top of her head, gave her a cute appearance. The attention from several yokai inside quickly went to her, and Tamamo stepped a bit closer to Naruto, clearly uncomfortable by their stares. Naruto pulled her in an embrace, clearly letting everyone know she was taken, while Amaterasu and Inari were busy getting them their rooms. A few moments later, after speaking with the owner, Amaterasu and Inari walked over to them, the latter dangling a pair of keys in her hand, one of which she gave to Naruto. Your room is located next to ours with the number etched on the key. Amaterasu said, let's go to our rooms before meeting back here. And remember that you shouldn't run off somewhere without us. At least not until we meet with the current leader tomorrow in order to clear things up. She looked at Naruto, who rolled his eyes but nodded nonetheless. Sure, he broke his embrace of Tamamo but kept her hand in his. Let's go, Tamamo-chan, see you two later. Amaterasu and Inari stood there for a while before realizing they had nothing to do either, as the meeting wasn't until tomorrow, so with that they too headed to the shared room. The next day the group of four was led through several hallways as they made their way towards the meeting room. Amaterasu and Inari were wearing formal kimonos, while Tamamo wore her blue witchcraft outfit, which garnered some perverse glances from some of the guards walking along with them. Though a single look from Naruto got them to quickly tear the gaze away. He himself wore a thick black robes with a couple red frills going down the sleeves and collar. Guards walked on each of their sides. A lot more than usual, Amaterasu and Inari had noticed. No doubt they were afraid by Naruto's presence, as he was somewhat of a wild card here. They knew neither Shinto goddesses would attempt anything, but they could never be too sure with a devil. As they passed a slightly opened door, he glanced inside only to stare straight into a pair of golden eyes similar to Tamamo's. It was barely a second, but he had gotten a good look of the person who was there. A young girl no older than 12, he would put her long blonde hair put in a ponytail while wearing a small red kimono. He noticed her golden fox ears and managed to spot at least 3 tails swishing behind her before he was forced to look away as they continued their walk. Said girl in question opened the door a tad bit more before peeking her head out and turned to the left in order to keep watching the group, though her attention was mostly on the blonde male of the 4 before they turned the corner and walked out of her view. Naruto sighed in relief after they finally arrived after walking for what seemed like forever. While he usually had no problems walking long distances, the fact that it was through a bunch of boring hallways quickly dampened his mood. One of the guards up front knocked on the door before they heard a slightly muffled but clearly male voice telling them to enter. The door was opened as one by one they walked in. Amaterasu went inside first while he entered last. Inside they spotted the man they had the meeting with, the current leader of Kyoto, who went by the name Kurama. The man had red hair which went down past his shoulders with matching eyes. He then spotted the man's red with black-tipped fox ears and 9 tails that were spread out behind them, clearly indicating that he was a Kyuubi. He also wore rather interesting yet dangerous-looking armor and was releasing a malicious aura that could only be matched by some of the more powerful devils. "Thank you for having us here, Kurama Dono." Amaterasu greeted the Yukai with respect. "You already know me and Inari." The fox goddess bowed slightly. "While behind me are my guards Tamamo no Mei and Naruto Bale." Upon hearing the Naruto's name, Kurama's eyes snapped towards the blonde male only for his eyes to widen to their extremes as he took in the blonde man's features. Amaterasu and Inari wrote off his look due to being surprised at his identity as she saw the guards in the room each having the same expression as well upon knowing just who it was that was in the room with them. Some already silently praying for staring at Tamamo before. While they were all focused on him, Naruto on the other hand had his blue eyes glued on the symbol hanging on the wall behind the Yukai leader. A purple circle with several ripples running through it. The same one that the weird-looking man's eyes had in his dreams. "Man, that was really boring." Naruto first spoke up the moment they exited the meeting room. His choice of words got him a light slap against his arm by Tamamo, who gave a playful glare making him cower and take a step closer to Amaterasu and Inari, who giggled at the sight of the powerful devil being bossed around. "Tamamo," Naruto whined quite pitifully as the Kitsune Yukai huffed in return. A sly smirk suddenly graced his face before he wrapped her in his arms, catching her off guard as she was unable to move. Tamamo wiggled in an attempt to escape, her protests muffled due to her face being buried in his clothing. Feeling her cease to resist after a moment, he pulled her back enough to look down and see a pout gracing her pretty face. Her ears twitching lightly as a faint blush dusted her cheeks. Surprising her, he reached down before scooping her up in his arms, eliciting a surprised squeal from Tamamo as she found herself being carried like a princess. It was Naruto who was surprised this time, as instead of attempting to break free she snuggled into him, relishing in the warmth he gave off. As they walked like that towards the inn, Naruto, carrying Tamamo with Inari and Amaterasu on each of his sides, he spoke up. "Say, Amaterasu, Inari, can you tell me a bit more about Kurama?" Both goddesses looked at each other before at him with a single eyebrow raised. "Oh, did something catch your attention?" To their surprise he nodded his head and spoke with a serious tone that caught him off guard. "Yes, I did." Hanging behind him on the wall was a symbol, a purple circle with black rings going through it. The exact same as the eyes belonging to that man in my dreams. That's not even mentioning the aura he was releasing. It felt just way too evil to belong to a Yukai, you know. Like, even devils would be hard-pressed to release a similar aura like Kurama had. Tamamo here has a completely opposite aura that's so welcoming and calming, with an underline of power that's such a contrast compared to his. "Well," Amaterasu began, "all that's known is that he's been Kyoto's leader for over a century. Nobody knows exactly how old he is, as he usually just gives a vague answer if one would ask. Aside from that, Inari told me that one day he just suddenly arrived in Kyoto. Of course he was immediately accepted after all. He's a Kyuubi, which are known as the strongest, and like you said, he had this aura around him that pretty much demands respect from others around him. Apparently, but I don't know if this is true, the previous leader had groomed him for leadership shortly after his arrival and is the only one who knows more about him. Unfortunately though, the previous leader had perished when defending a group of nekomatas when a large group of fallen angels ambushed them. He was old though, easily several centuries, and as a result was no longer at his prime, which led to his demise, though that was after he managed to get every one of the nekomatas to safety. His actions are one of the main reasons nekomatas have settled in Kyoto even to this day. And while the previous leader is still praised for his actions to this day for bringing in many clans, none of the other Yukai can deny that having Kurama as their leader has been the best thing that has happened to Kyoto as a whole. He's as strong as high ultimate class devils, easily capable of destroying entire cities with his unique Bayudama, which he had revealed is a compressed ball of pure chakra, a attack unique to only himself. He's capable of fighting off opponents as high as 10 winged angels, and fallen and even minor gods such as Ares will have a tough time fighting him. Interesting, so the aura isn't just intimidation factor, huh? Naruto mumbled mainly to himself, though it wasn't missed by either women. Well, it is, it's just much more effective against yokai who are able to sense his chakra. It helps with keeping challenges away, you know. After all, who wants to fight against a Kyuubi who reeks of blood and holds an aura that promises death? I wouldn't be opposed to it. Though if he's not even near Seraphal in strength, I don't see it worth my time, to be honest. He said with a casual shrug of his shoulders before noticing that they had already arrived back at the inn they were staying at. Entering the inn, he turned to Inari and Amaterasu. Tamamo and I will be in our room doing stuff. We'll be out in time to get some dinner so you two can look over the contract once more, he said before wishing him goodbye as he made his way to the shared room. Okay, that's fine, don't make too much noise though, there are other people staying here. Inari called out to him, taking pleasure in seeing him falter in his steps. Tamamo buried her face into his clothing in an attempt to hide herself from the looks sent their way courtesy of the fox goddess. Regaining his footing, he increased the pace before quickly entering their room and gently placing Tamamo on their bed. Turning around, he made sure to lock the door before looking through some papers where Tamamo had put silencing seals she had made yesterday. Finding it, he grabbed it before placing it on the door and then activating it using a small amount of demonic energy. Satisfied that he could no longer hear any sounds coming from outside, he turned around to see Tamamo removing her coat she wore over her regular outfit and began undoing his own robes before throwing them on the chair nearby before he made his way over to where she was lying on her stomach, her tail wagging back and forth. As he was just a feet away from her, he pounced at her, though careful enough not to hurt her tail, as the two rolled around in bed, their lips locked together as their hands were busy roaming over the other's body. Naruto groaned softly as his tongue met hers while his hands tenderly rubbed her sides as he was laying on his back with Tamamo straddling him. Her hands were resting on his shoulders as she broke the kiss for a brief moment to catch her breath as she quickly lowered her head back towards his, all while purring excitingly at the feel of his hands which were now massaging her bare thighs. Stopping just at her blue stockings before moving back up. Shifting himself so he was now sitting on the bed with Tamamo still in his lap, his hands traveled upwards before they began tugging on the obi that kept her top secure in an attempt to remove it. Breaking the lip lock and leaving Tamamo panting heavily, he trailed down a trail of kisses to her neck before sucking and biting on a certain sensitive spot he knew she had, all while growling in slight annoyance as her obi didn't want to come loose. Tamamo didn't notice his annoyance as she enjoyed what he was doing to her as she ran her fingers through his blonde locks which felt like feathers to her touch. Feeling his canine slightly enter her skin, she whimpered as she was pulled out of her daze and could feel him tugging on her obi. Placing her hands back on his shoulders, she pushed him back, earning a confused look from the blonde which she returned with a seductive smirk as she reached behind her and much to his annoyance loosened her obi with a single flick of her wrist. Naruto propped himself up using his elbows, eyes watching intently as she removed her chest piece revealing her naked skin with the exception of her breast which were covered by bandages. He remembered the first time he saw her like this. He was honestly surprised with just big her breasts were as her outfit kept them secured quite well. The chest wrappings giving the illusion they were much smaller than they actually were. Undoing her bandages with a small blush as she noticed his intense stare which was focused on her face instead of her breast, she let them free though quickly covered them with her arm as she threw the bindings to the side. Naruto leaned up, tasting her supple lips once more as one of his hands grabbed the one covering her breast before pulling it to the side. He broke the kiss as blue eyes stared into amber ones, their foreheads resting against the other as both were breathing heavily. Beautiful as ever, he breathed out as he quickly pecked her lips, making her pout cutely as she was unable to savor his lips. His words were true as he just stared at her, his hand came up and cupped her cheek. She was perfect. He loved everything about her and was not afraid to tell her that. From the moment he laid his eyes on her, he knew that they were perfect for another. Like yin and yang, they completed each other. I love you, Tamamo, now and forever. He smiled softly as he saw a single tear trickle down from her eye. A tear that signified her happiness at hearing his words. Unable to hold in her emotions, Tamamo smashed her lips against his. Naruto fell back, caught off guard by the amount of emotions he could feel in the kiss. Tamamo fell on top of him as he felt her tongue explore his mouth. As lust overtook both of them, the rest of their clothes joined the ground as they lost themselves in the pleasure the other provided. Naruto hummed softly. He was laying on the bed, naked as the day he was born. Laying on top of him was the sweaty form of Tamamo clad in only her blue stockings. She wore a content smile as she purred softly from his hands which were combing through her tail. Hey Tamamo, the fox girl hummed softly upon hearing her say, her head tilting slightly upwards prompting him to continue. I'm thinking about visiting the underworld sometime soon. His words made her perk up, a questioning expression on her face as she wondered where that came from. She knew he didn't want to go back there as he had stated several times during conversations they had. Why, well, I have this feeling, like something bad is going to happen. I'm not sure how to explain it, to be honest. It's just this nagging feeling I have in the back of my head and I just need to make sure the underworld won't do anything if something were to happen. I'm still too valuable of a person for the underworld to lose, and I don't want them to accuse any other factions if something were to happen. I understand. Are you going alone? Naruto glanced down at her before shaking his head. No. You will be going with me. In fact, I want you to go with me so I can laugh in the face of the elders if we run into them. He chuckled lightly as he could already envision how that would play out. Won't they try anything? She mumbled, concerned. Naruto scoffed and growled. I'll dare them to try. With me there with you, there's nothing to worry about. They're mostly talk anyway, and you should just ignore whatever they say like I do. He laughed and she joined in with her own giggles. Okay, when will we be leaving? Her question successfully stopped his laughter. He removed his hands from her tail and began rubbing her back as he was busy thinking, not really hearing the soft moans she released. Not sure really. He rolled her over so she was now laying on her side facing him. I guess as soon as we're done here, or do you want to go somewhere beforehand? Tamamo shook her head before leaning into him and he pulled her into an embrace. I'm fine with leaving when you want, Naruto-kun. Naruto smiled and nodded. That's good. For now let's just lay like this for a while, okay? We should have a couple of hours before meeting Amaterasu and Inari for dinner. Tamamo didn't reply, though he felt her rest her head against his chest and her hands placed against his stomach. He leaned his head down slightly and kissed her ears as they twitched in response. Sighing softly as he felt her breathing slower, he proceeded to shut his eyes as well, just for a little while. Twitch, twitch, twitch. ... Can't you stop it already? He asked finally after minutes of enduring their stares and large smiles which made both him and Tamamo uncomfortable. Ma, are you embarrassed, Naru-chan? Inari asked with a shit-eating grin on her face. His eye twitched once more, though this time much more violent at how she addressed him. Naru-chan, hey, she's lucky he enjoyed her company or else he would have walked off by now. Instead he settled for sighing deeply as his head impacted the table they were sitting at. The sound earned him a few curious looks from other guests more than they already did that were there, though nobody said a thing. Tamamo merely patted his shoulder as a sign of support. Thank you, Tamamo, I see you understand my pain. He sat back up and leaned over, sharing a quick kiss with the vixen, who whimpered softly as he broke off, though he let her rest her head on his shoulder. From the corner of his eyes he noticed a few of the men watching them send a glare in his direction. No doubt part of the yokai who held the belief their race should not mingle with those not their own. Devils especially. He wondered if they knew just who he was, how quickly they would sing another tune, but meh. He cared less for them than they did for him, and he would let them. As long as they wouldn't bother Tamamo, he couldn't be less interested in what their opinion on him was. Anyway, he looked at both Amaterasu and Inari. Once we're done here, Tamamo and I will be heading to the underworld to take care of some business. His words earned two shocked looks from the woman sitting opposite of him and Tamamo. The underworld. I thought you were going to stay away from there for as long as you could. Naruto nodded his head at Inari's words. You are correct, but these past few days I've been getting this feeling that something big is going to happen. I don't know what or when, but I can safely say that something will happen. Us going to the underworld is mostly to make sure that should anything indeed happen, the underworld isn't going around accusing other factions of doing something they don't. It wouldn't do anybody any good if another war broke out due to false allegations. I see you thought this over. Amaterasu butt in, receiving a nod from him in return. Yep. It took a while to admit it to myself, but I eventually settled on it being the wisest choice of the ones available that favored both myself and Tamamo. He stopped speaking as he noticed Tamamo and Inari sniff the air before the former straightened herself. He rose an eyebrow but didn't say anything, for soon his nose was assaulted by the smell of food, no doubt the reason for Tamamo's sudden movement. Glancing to the source, he saw a young woman walking around, carrying several plates with food which she put down in front of the hungry customers. He smirked lightly as he spotted her, narrowed her eyes at a single customer who was a bit more hands-on than required. Eventually she made her way to their table and served them their food. Amaterasu's face held a small smirk as she saw Tamamo send the young woman a narrow-eyed glare, having caught her staring a bit too long at Naruto for her liking. Hey, can I ask something else? Naruto spoke between bites. Seeing he was looking at her, Amaterasu nodded her head, indicating he could speak. When we were walking to Kurama's office earlier today, I noticed a young girl spying on us. Any idea who she is? She had blonde hair much like my own, though a few shades darker, and eyes much like Tamamo's. Aside from that, I saw she had fox ears and several tails behind her. How much I don't know, but I managed to make out at least 3 of them. Amaterasu hummed a bit as she swallowed a mouthful of food before speaking. This girl, did she look any older than 12, 13? Seeing him shake his head negatively, she nodded herself. Her. She's a young kitsune yokai called Yasaka. Not a whole lot is known as Kurama keeps her protected, but what I can tell you is that her parents both died early in her life and is now raised by Kurama. Interesting, he mused, satisfied by the information she provided. They finished the rest of the dinner in mostly silence. the only exception being the small chatter that happened when Inari brought up certain topics about him which he answered with ease. Today was the day. Today he and Tamamo would go to the underworld for the first time in over a decade. They had spent a couple more days here just enjoying Kyoto in general. Honestly, it would be a nice place to live for a while if it wasn't for the blatant racism shown by the Yukai that lived here. Even with Kurama around, who had insisted on getting to know them better, did little to stop their words. And while he wasn't really bothered by their words, he couldn't say the same for Tamamo. He had seen the hurt flash across her eyes whenever they would call her names. When they called her a betrayer of their race for being intimate with a devil of all beings. It had taken a lot of self-control and Tamamo telling him to ignore them to not hurt them. While he conceded with her pleading, it didn't mean he did not give Kurama the same treatment. Oh no, not at all. He and the Kyoto leader had exchanged several words, most of them were him telling him to make sure to keep a leash on his people. His words weren't received well though, as Kurama had responded by flaring his aura. Had he been a high-class devil or some other Yukai, he would probably be shivering upon the feeling of danger the nine-tailed Yukai radiated. But he was not. He was Naruto Bale, a devil of unparalleled power capable of reducing Kyoto to ashes with a mere flick of his fingers. He had fought the heavenly dragons themselves and no Yukai, Kyuubi or not, would intimidate him, ever. So when Kurama tried using his power in an attempt to intimidate him, he had quickly let him know what he thought of that by showing him a glimpse of his true power as he had teleported the two to an abandoned valley surrounded by mountains. Or used to, at least, as with a casual snap of his fingers he had conjured up a magic seal big enough to fit the mountain inside before it fired down a thick beam of his clan's famous power. A single, large explosion later accompanied by an earthquake, and gone was the mountain along with the surrounding area, which was at least several miles in diameter. The casual display of power that was capable of wiping a village of the map was enough to let Kurama know that this new version of Naruto was not one he could mess with. It was quite ironic in a certain way though, as he wondered what were to happen were he to ever regain his memories. Gone was the young loudmouthed and cocky boy he could instill fear in with just his aura alone. The roles were reversed this time around, much to his slight annoyance, yet there was also a part of happiness in him seeing Naruto again. He had felt bad for the boy during the time he had been sealed inside of him. While he didn't show it, he knew firsthand the boy's life was harder than it should have been. It was just that his past interactions with humans, or at least a certain Uchiha, had made him hate every one of them, and he was not going to play nice just to see if this one was any different. Though having said that, even he was silently impressed with how the boy had never given up, to the point that it had cost him his life regardless of the attempts he made to heal the boy back up. Perhaps it would have been different had he succeeded in keeping the boy alive. But it was just a possibility, however, it wasn't set in stone, and he could have turned out like the rest of them. A power-hungry fool who only sees him as a mindless beast and not the intelligent being he truly was. Though Kurama couldn't say he wasn't pleased with how it had turned out. When he had reformed, he immediately knew something was wrong. That something being that no longer was he a massive orange-furred nine-tailed fox. No, instead he was a human, or at least so in appearance, with 9 tails and fox ears on his head. He was pleased to find out his strength hadn't diminished a single bit regardless of the new form he had. No longer was he a being filled with hatred conjured up from several centuries of being subjected to the words and actions of humans to his kind. While he still had the aura that radiated malevolence and death to his enemies and demanded respect to those serving under him, it wasn't an unconscious thing anymore. In his place was the new him, who was a leader, a being of hope and power to his own species. Yukai of all kinds looked up to him, wanted to be him. He understood now. He understood why Naruto wanted to be Hokage despite the hatred he endured. His current position even lessened the hatred he felt for the boy's father, or previous father at least, when the man had sacrificed himself in order to seal him away so he could stop the destruction he had caused. The reason he hadn't completely forgiven the man was due to him taking half of his power into the Shinigami when he had summoned the deity. But aside from that, and after all that he has done and experienced as Kyoto's Yukai leader, he would do the same thing as Minato had done to secure the village's safety. Even up to the point of sacrificing himself to make sure they were safe. For Naruto, being near Kurama in general made his brain hurt, even if only a little. It was like he had met the man before, but he knew 100% sure the meeting they had during their stay was the first time he had seen the man. It didn't stop the stinging feeling he felt in the back of his head every now and then. What was worse though was that Kurama did in fact seem to know him, at least that is what he could come up with seeing the Yukai's body language. During their first meeting with Amaterasu and Inari, he could sense the man felt relieved upon seeing him, yet shocked at the same time. Like they were old friends who heard the other had died only to show up weeks later looking better than ever. At the time he didn't think much of it, writing it off as being mistaken for somebody else, but when Kurama had insisted on getting to know both himself and Tamamo better, the feeling returned. Despite that, he still acted like his usual self, or at least tried to, as Tamamo could tell something was bothering him and confronted him about it later that day. Tamamo was also the reason Naruto acted more guarded than usual around him. Kurama had shown a lot of interest in his Kitsune companion. While most questions weren't out of the ordinary, such as where and how they met or if they were really a couple, some other questions were a bit more personal to ask to someone you hadn't met for longer than a day. He was pleased though when Tamamo had politely told the Kyuubi she didn't feel comfortable answering such questions for the short time they knew each other, and Kurama seemed to accept that. The Kyuubi could see how much they cared for another and felt happy for both of them. This new Naruto wasn't anywhere as dense when it came to the opposite sex as his other self. He wondered what was happening with those girls back in Konoha, if they were still alive, that is. While he had been alive for over a century here in this world, and so had Naruto from knowing just who he was, he didn't know if time passed here at the same rate as it did where he came from. For all he knows, only a week could have passed in the elemental nations. That Hyuga girl that had shown an unhealthy amount of interest in his former jailer was the first that came to mind. While she wasn't a bad choice, and had Naruto survived that day and he was still inside of him, he wouldn't mind seeing the two get together. Even if the girl was a bit too meek for his liking, Naruto, not used to female interactions, had no such thoughts. Though, he still didn't quite see where the girl's infatuation with Naruto came from, as he couldn't recall even a single conversation Naruto had with the Hyuga girl. What did the Hyuga girl expect to happen? That she would profess her love for him and he would immediately return it despite having spoken no more than a couple words here and there. Perhaps if this was one of those bad love stories it might gone that way. Then there was that pink-haired girl, Sakura. God may know what his former jailer saw in that girl. He did wonder if he had a thing for pink, as Tamamo too had pink hair, though hers was more peach pink whereas Sakura's was bright pink to the point it was almost an eyesore. That's not even mentioning that she seemed to love punching the boy for no apparent reason whatsoever, only to come crying in the end when the Uchiha had deserted the village. Bunch of weaklings. Yeah, the old Naruto's track record with girls definitely wasn't something to be proud about. Which why he was surprised to see him with someone like Tamamo, who appeared to be completely adored with him. Though hearing that he had saved her from death by killing several thousand men could do that to a girl. Kurama also asked him how he ended up as a bodyguard of someone like Amaterasu of all people. Naruto explained how she, on Tamamo's insistence, had saved him after a scuffle with the two heavenly dragons during the last period of the Great War. The fact that he mentioned that and was still alive was just another testament to Naruto's power, which have surpassed his own by bounds. It did make him somewhat curious though what it was that Naruto, Sirex and Ijuka had that differentiated them from the rest. Each of the three was just over a century old, yet have all achieved a level of power not seen before by any devil. Even the original Satans didn't come close to the power the three held. Naruto had merely replied with a shrug, as he didn't know either nor that he really cared. He knew Kurama wasn't the only one who was wondering about that. Knowing Azazel after the trashing he gave him during the war, he had little doubt the man was using his blood to see what made him stand out above the dozen other devils born. He wouldn't put it past the elders to attempt something either. They were probably testing 24/7 to see if they can manually inject someone with one of their blood in hopes of creating a devil of their power that actually listens to what they have to say. Somewhat of a frightening thought should it somehow work out. But enough of that. It's time to return to the main story. Kurama stood at the gate separating Kyoto from the rest of Japan. Flanking his sides were several guards, each armed to the teeth. Not that it mattered much though, as if a fight broke out it wouldn't do much aside from slow them down. Standing opposite of them were Amaterasu and Inari, with Naruto and Tamamo holding hands as it was time to leave. Amaterasu, with the help of Inari, had finally finalized the arrangements that satisfied both the Shinto faction and Kyoto equally. Neither goddess had said it out loud, but they did imply that Kurama was quite the negotiator. Once more I thank you for coming by, it's been a pleasure seeing both of you again. He gave a light bow before turning to Naruto and Tamamo. Same goes for both of you as well. Despite the less than pleasant comments thrown your way, I'm thankful nothing bad happened. The two reciprocated his gesture with a bow of their own. Thank you, we might return once people are less. He trailed off, but Kurama understood what he was implying and nodded his head. The blatant racism Yukai showed was something he was going to work on soon. Clapping his hands together he addressed the group. Very well, it's been nice seeing each of you and I wish you a pleasant day and I look forward to seeing you again. Oh, Naruto suddenly exclaimed, getting everyone's attention. He looked back at Kurama as his expression shifted into a serious one. You never told me what your connection is to that symbol you have in your office. Kurama just smiled. Maybe I'll tell you next time you come by. I doubt you have time to listen to me speak for a while. He threw a jab in there much to his own amusement. Rolling his eyes he nodded his head nonetheless as he felt Tamamo increase the hold she had on his hand and looked at his girlfriend. Yes, I know, it's time. Releasing a deep sigh, the couple waved Amaterasu and Inari goodbye as a teleportation circle belonging to the Bales clan formed beneath their feet. Don't forget to see us when you two are done. Inari could be heard as the magic circle glowed brightly before the glow dissipated and they were done. Gazing at the spot the two previously were, Amaterasu breathed softly before sparing Kurama one last look as they two disappeared. Seems like it hasn't changed a single bit. came Naruto's voice the moment he stepped outside of the teleportation circle he had created. Actually, it seems like the sky is no longer purple, so I guess that counts for something. He shrugged uncaringly as Tamamo joined his side. Moo, Naruto-kun, do you have to be so pessimistic? Naruto scratched his cheek as he flashed her a smile. Ah, sorry Tamamo, but you know how I feel about coming here. Tamamo gave a small nod as she moved herself closer to Naruto, who welcomed her gesture by wrapping an arm around her waist. Looking around, Naruto spotted some familiar buildings which helped him figure out where it was that the two of them exactly were, and if he was correct, they were near Lucifard. Alright, Tamamo, whatever you do, keep close to me the entire time we will be here. Not many devils are used to yokai or anyone that isn't a member of our race here in the underworld for that matter. That, plus the fact that you're beautiful, and I wouldn't put some of those fools to try and get their hands on you. Luckily though, that's where I come in. He closed his eyes and breathed in deeply. Next to him, Tamamo felt the surrounding air around them shift as it became much more heavier, though not unpleasant to her. Naruto breathed out slowly as he began to release an aura which spelled death or something similar for those foolish enough to move close enough to them. Opening his eyes, he glanced to his side to see Tamamo was unbothered by the sudden change in his aura, which pleased him greatly. This should be enough to scare away even ultimate class devils, or at least make them wary and cautious of approaching. Satisfied with himself, Naruto and Tamamo stepped out of the alleyway they had appeared in and entered the street. A small smile formed on his face as he spotted the glances sent their way the moment the two had entered the same street they were all walking on. He was also happy their eyes went on him and not Tamamo, or else he had to increase the intensity of it. He wasn't jealous, he just didn't appreciate lustful looks sent his girlfriend's way. She was his and only he got to look at her like that. As they neared the end of the street, Naruto stopped, catching Tamamo off guard, who turned and sent him a curious glance only to see him having his eyes closed. Closing his eyes, Naruto attempting to sense Sirek's demonic energy. While he was by no means an expert sensor, even he was capable of sensing Sirex and Ajuka, both whose demonic energy was comparable to his own. Furrowing his brows together, he managed to finally sense Sirex, who was in Lilith. With a shrug of his shoulders, he opened his eyes and noticed Tamamo looking curiously at him, and he smiled. I was trying to find Sirex. I managed to find him in Lilith, which is quite a bit away from here, so we have to use other ways of travel. Tamamo made an noise while surprised with Naruto's sensing skills, as he never told her he was capable of such. A teleportation circle began to form before their feet. They saw a couple looks send their way as passerbys recognized the Baal symbol it held but didn't comment on it. If they didn't recognize him, he couldn't care less. With that, the two entered the magic circle as it glowed before teleporting the two away. They reappeared in front of a large mansion, and by large Naruto meant really large, as it was way bigger than necessary in his opinion. He couldn't blame Sirex though, as devils were notorious for showing of their wealth and status. Let's go, Tamamo. He took a hold of her hand and made his way to the front door. As they walked, Naruto wondered why there were no guards before shaking his head lightly as he remembered this was Sirex he was talking about. The man was the current Lucifer, and only a fool would attempt to harm him. Mainly as they wouldn't stand a chance lest the names were Ajuka or Naruto. His knuckle impacted with the door as he knocked twice before taking a step back and crossed his arms. He held an impassive gaze as he waited for someone to answer the door. They didn't have to wait for long, as Naruto could sense quite a large energy signature on the other side of the door comparable to Seraphal's own. This is unexpected, Naruto thought as he stared at a pair of silver eyes which gazed curiously at him. The person who answered the door was someone he had no knowledge of, which showed as one of his eyebrows were raised. It was a young woman with silver hair, clad in a maid outfit which seemed to hug her body quite tightly, if the fact that her chest was straining against the fabric was an indication. Despite this woman being the source of the large demonic energy, Naruto didn't look concerned in the slightest as he kept staring back at the woman. Her silver hair making him guess she belongs, or at least belonged, either to the Lucifer clan or Lucifuge. Though, the former was quickly written off, as there was no way any member of the Lucifer clan would lower themselves to the point they would serve under anyone. The fact that the aura around the woman seemed a bit chilly just made it easier to recognize from which house she originated from. A quick glance to his left, he saw that Tamamo seemed to be inspecting her, as well as her amber orbs were narrowed slightly. Who are you? The Silverette asked as her own silver eyes narrowed as she looked cautiously at the blonde man before her. He was radiating an aura of absolute dominance and power that even affected her, something she didn't thought was possible. She could even withstand Sirex's aura. Her eyes then shifted from the man to the pink-haired Kitsune Yukai standing close to him. In a way, she noticed that he could protect her at any moment's notice. She herself was taller than the Yukai standing there, even with the footwear she wore, which she recognized were of Japanese origins. The thing that made her curious though was that the Kitsune woman only had a single tail behind her, which made her wonder what she was doing in company of this blonde man who's a devil of all things. A very powerful one from the looks of it. She knew devils and Yukai didn't get along with each other by any means. She wrote it off as him keeping her around for her looks, as even she had to admit the woman was quite a looker even by devil standards, and her somewhat revealing outfit didn't do much to deter her from forming her own conclusion. She was taking out of her thoughts as the blonde spoke up. I need to speak with Sirex. Her eyes narrowed even more than they did before at the straightforwardness he displayed, along with the fact how he addressed her husband like they were longtime friends and not Lucifer Sama like so many others. The only one she knew that addressed him like that was Ajuka, who was a very good friend of him. I'm afraid I can't allow that, she responded as she got a more defensive position. She didn't recognize the man in front of her, and from the power he radiated she knew he was dangerous and was unsure she could fight this man off if it came to that. She was proven correct as the man's power spiked outwards and grunted slightly as she felt like a weight was pressing down on her. Looking to his side, she was surprised when the woman seemed unbothered by the sudden change in the air, meaning he was only aiming at her. I'm sorry, I don't think I heard you correctly. Did you just say that I couldn't speak with Sirex? He saw her attempting to reply and let loose another burst of power, this time more than he did before. I'm not asking, I'm telling you. From the clothes you're wearing, you're a maid, a powerful one I admit, but I don't think you understand just who it is you are speaking to. At this point his aura had gotten so oppressive it threatened to drown her as his blue eyes had frozen over as they looked at her hunched over form. Idly she wondered why Sirex was not here, but if this man really could control his power to such a degree, her husband most likely wasn't aware something was even happening. Suddenly, however, it stopped. 1 second she was threatening to drown in this man's power and the next second it was gone. As she regained her bearings and her breath, she briefly flared her power twice. It wasn't much, especially not compared to the amount this man had let wash over her, but it was enough to let Sirex know she needed his help. As she regained her breath, she slowly looked up, only to promptly sweet drop as she watched the reason why the man had stopped releasing his power on her. She absent-mindedly noticed the Gremory teleportation circle form on the ground behind her as she watched the man's blue-clad companion berate him for what he had done to her. It was quite disbelieving to see this man who was able to almost force her to her knees with just his power holding his head down in shame as the Yukai woman continued to scold him for overreacting while shaking her head at him. It oddly enough reminded her much like her own relationship. Graphia, are you alright? I sensed you flare your energy in Naruto. Tamamo stopped scolding Naruto for making the maid almost pass out as she heard someone else call his name. She turned her head the same time Naruto did and watched the long crimson-haired man standing next to the silver-haired maid looking at Naruto as if he saw a ghost. Naruto, is that really you? He asked once again as Graphia looked confused. Her husband knew this blonde man. Well, it wouldn't really surprise her that his friends were all ridiculously powerful like Sirex himself. Of course it's me. Who else has my blonde hair? Not even the Phoenix has this shade of blonde. Not to mention, he held his hand out before it was engulfed in crimson flames as crimson sparks ran through it. From where she was, Graphia could easily feel the extreme heat radiating from his flame-covered hand to the point that she had to use her own ice magic to stop herself from sweating. A look to her side and she saw drops of sweat fall from Sirex's face. The same went for the woman next to the blonde whose pink locks began to stick to the side of her face. All right, you've proven yourself, Sirex said and let out a small sigh as the flames dissipated. Tell me, what is your business here? You haven't been in the underworld since the Great War and suddenly you appear here before my wife and I. Naruto blinked as he looked at the silverette. Wife, you're married. A nod was his answer. Damn, he almost did something he'd end up regretting. Why is she wearing a maid's outfit if she's your wife? Sirex merely shrugged. He had asked that himself and apparently it has to do with how the Lucifuge clan serves the Lucifer clan. Him being named the new Lucifer, she had quickly took up the role of his personal maid. Anyway, what are you here for? You know your father has been looking for you ever since you disappeared. And who is she? He looked at Tamamo who was hugging his arm before shaking his head. You know what, how about you two come in and we can talk further there. He stepped aside and gestured for them to enter. Naruto and Tamamo shared a look before the two entered with Sirex and Graphia following behind. So you're telling me that you're working for Amaterasu? Sirex asked him as if he heard it incorrectly. Naruto nodded his head. He was currently sitting on the opposite side of Sirex as they all moved to his office. Graphia, his wife and maid stood behind the Crimson Lucifer for some reason as he didn't really care about. He found it weird to treat your wife like a maid, but if they liked it then good for them. There was an empty chair next to the one he was sitting on that was meant for Tamamo, but Naruto had pulled the fox girl on his lap before she could sit down. The action garnered raised eyebrows from Sirex and Graphia, but Naruto didn't care about them as Tamamo was currently curled up against his chest. That's correct, they were the two that took care of me after our little escapade with the heavenly dragons. Though I admit it was mostly due to Tamamo's insistence that she took me in. What do you mean? Well, how do I explain? He moved one of his hands that was rubbing Tamamo's legs up and scratched his cheek. Quite a long time ago, shortly after the death of my mother, you know, when I just didn't want anything to do with anyone, I made a trip to the human world. Japan to be more precisely. Anyway, I was not in a good mood. He shook his head. No, to say I wasn't in a good mood is quite the understatement, but whatever. I was just flying around to clear my head of certain thoughts when I had spotted several lights up in the distance. Me being me, I flew towards it, hoping it was something that could quell my lust for blood. To kill something and get rid of the anger I held. His eyes flickered between blue and red, which didn't go unnoticed by the others in the room. Long story short, I found Tamamo here running away from several thousands of men. Seeing she had tears running down her cheeks, I quickly made my choice and killed every single one of them. Unfortunately though, it didn't quite quell my anger, so found out the palace they belonged to and with a single snap of my fingers erased it from existence. Here he let out some chuckles. I later found out that man was the 24th Emperor of Japan, which was quite the surprise. He looked up and noticed Sirex and Grafier's shocked looks at that piece of info. I didn't return to see what happened to Tamamo, but apparently Amaterasu had taken her in while I busy cleaning the world from filth like him. It felt quite good to just remove people like them with a simple snap of the fingers. Moving on and fast forward to the end of the war. I was exhausted as that new form used ridiculous amount of demonic energy to keep up. You and I, during our clash with the heavenly dragons, released enough power other pantheons over the world were able to feel it. Apparently Amaterasu along with Tamamo here were watching the happenings play out, and she recognized me from when I saved her that time and got Amaterasu to bring me to Takamagahara, where I spent days sleeping while Tamamo took it upon herself to take care of me. Something that I'm still very grateful for even to this day. He leaned his head down and kissed one of her ears. After I woke up and was explained where I was and who they all were, Amaterasu was nice enough to let me stay there until I was back to 100%, which took several weeks, where once I was healed she offered both me and Tamamo to act as her bodyguards and if we wanted to work under her. Naruto cleared his throat from all the talking before continuing. Apparently Tamamo had taken a liking to me ever since I had saved her back then, and I spent much of my time with her up in Takamagahara. I too came to like her as more than a friend during that time and asked if she wanted to travel with me, as I had no interest in returning to the underworld. Even now I still don't want to be here, but it's quite important that I am. I see, that's quite the story you have there, Naruto. But why don't you want to be here? You're a devil, you belong here. Sirex reasoned, and Naruto shook his head. I have a lot of bad memories here. My mother had died due to some super rare disease which at the time broke me, and Zekrom isn't someone I can let loose these pent-up emotions I had, which I bottled up until I just snapped, which happened during the war. The time I was away from the underworld was the best time I had since my mother's death. Even when I was asleep and regaining my energy, the first few days in Takamagahara was just, I can't really describe it. It was like I had no worries. Like all my troubles had washed away. Never had I felt more refreshed than I did back then. And you know the reason for that? It was Tamamo here. Somehow with her nearby I feel so at peace with myself, it's unbelievable. I knew that if I would return to the underworld, no doubt I was going to end up as clan head for the Bale clan, especially after my power has been revealed during the war. But therein lies the problem, I have no interest in leading the clan. No doubt the elders would end up trying to hook me up with some woman I haven't heard about, if only in an attempt to control me, or more specifically my power. I have no interest in any pure-blooded devil. None of them interest me in the slightest, for they all want something instead of love. Power and prestige. Marrying into the Bale clan would give them an enormous boost status-wise, both for themselves and their clan should we have children, and I don't want that. The only person I see myself forming a family with is Tamamo here. A blush covered her cheeks as she held a smile at hearing that. And nobody else, and therein lies another problem. The Bale clan is widely known for having the purest blood, so imagine what will end up happening when I show Tamamo as my wife. I see you understand. I care little for titles or fame really. What I want is to eventually have a family with someone I love and who loves me back for who I am. Tamamo is that person, and I will choose her over any titles any day of the week. Should anyone attempt to break us apart, the elders for example who want my bloodline to stay pure, and I will eradicate them along with the house they hail from out of existence. The expression he held was one of seriousness that promised he would do what he just said, surprised Sirex and Grafier as he was basically threatening his own race. Is that a threat? Sirex leaned forward slightly as he began leaking his demonic energy. The desk he was leaning on cracked under the pressure as he stared at Naruto, who began to release his own demonic energy. The room shook as both super devils increased their energy output. Sirex was surprised as he noticed Tamamo seemingly unaffected by the oppressive aura that was reigning the room, and that she was in between the two of their auras. A quick glance to his side showed that Grafier, his wife, was having slight trouble, which made him even more curious as her power was close if not on par with Seraphil's own. Yet somehow the pinkit in Naruto's lap, despite only having a single tail, showed no signs of discomfort. Narrowing his eyes slightly, he increased his power output even more, which Naruto easily matched, as by now the entire mansion was shaking from their power as wisps of flames began to form at his hair. Then without a warning Sirex stopped, with Naruto following shortly thereafter, much to the relief of the devils that were currently visiting Lilith as the invisible weight that was weighing him down disappeared. Very well, I understand. But what do you want me to tell your father? He's still looking for your return. Nothing. You haven't seen me is what you tell him. Regarding the clan, if I'm correct, Zekrom has another child with that woman whom I didn't bother learning the name of. Can't he or she take up leadership when they come of age? He, Zekrom Dono's child is a he, so yes, he can take up leadership when he's old enough. The question is though if Zekrom will agree. You, Ajuka and myself and one other are labeled super devils, which are devils that have reached a level of power that was previously unheard of. The chance of his younger son surpassing you is abysmal, and Zekrom doesn't want his clan to look weak. Naruto seemed to think over his words for a moment before ultimately shrugging his shoulders. Well, that's not my problem. He surprised them with how casually he shrugged his concerns off. Interesting, Sirex mused, somewhat amused by his behavior. You know, some devils are upset that you weren't fighting during the civil war we had. Ho, and what are they going to do about that? Seriously, you said it not even a minute ago, our power is beyond any of them. Even Seraphal and Falbium, two Satans, are just high ultimate class compared to us. Not receiving a reply, Naruto allowed a small smirk to grace his features before stifling a groan as Tamamo moved herself in his lap. Tamamo, he growled, getting her to stop and look at him with a sheepish expression. He shook his head as he leaned down and pecked her lips. Tehehe, sorry. From where he was sitting, Sirex smiled at their interactions. Graphia had told him what had happened before he had arrived, and he couldn't help but compare their relationship to his own. Tamamo, much like Graphia, was a strong woman capable of reining Naruto in should he go out of line. She even scolded him the same as Graphia would do to him. Anyway, Naruto, is there anything else? Such as the reason why you are here, perhaps? Ah yes, I'm here to tell you that should something happen in the upcoming months regarding me, I don't want you to panic and send out or accuse other factions of their involvement. I have been getting this nagging feeling in the back of my mind the past few weeks, and I'm almost certainly something will happen that has to do with me. I already informed Amaterasu of this as well, so she won't panic if I suddenly stop responding for a while. Sirex hummed as he mulled over his words. Are you sure you don't need any help? I mean. Naruto shook his head. Nah, I can handle almost anything. The only beings that pose a threat, and I'm aware of, are Hindu gods, Great Red and Office. Speaking of gods, you heard anything from the Greek pantheon? Sirex shook his head. Huh, that's a surprise knowing their fragile ego. I had expected at least something, whatever. If it comes to it, I will grace them with a visit, and lay out some ground rules. Sirex and Graphia sweet-dropped as they listened to him speak about gods like they were a pair of children. Though if they end up acting like a bunch of brats, I might just erase them on accident. I did warn them after all. He began to chuckle as he could imagine their faces before he would blast them with enough power to destroy half of Japan. Naruto stopped his chuckling and peered down at Tamamo, who nudged him. Ah yes, sorry. He looked at Sirex and Graphia. It's been fun, but it's time for us to leave. We've already been here for longer than we were supposed to be. Tell Seraphal, Ajuka and Falbium I said hello. A teleportation circle formed underneath the chair they were sitting on. It's been nice meeting you as well, despite our miscommunication, he said to Graphia. It's been an honor to meet you as well, Naruto-sama, she said, and Naruto found it weird to be called that by his friend's wife but didn't comment on it. It's been good seeing you again, Red. I'll make sure to send you an invitation for when me and Tamamo plan on getting married. With that he gave him one last wave with his hand before they disappeared. Once they left his office, Sirex stood up and stretched his legs. Well, that's been fun. Good to see he has found someone himself. Let's go, Graphia. It's time to visit Ajuka and tell him about the visitor that just left. Hi, Sirex-sama, his wife maid said as she followed him out the room. What? The loud, thunderous voice of the Reikage boomed through the room. His chakra rose to the surface as lightning crackled around his bulky frame. The messenger kneeling before him gulped but managed to control himself. It wouldn't do him any good to show himself weak in front of his leader. We saw B-sama being captured by Akatsuki. We were alerted when we felt a large chakra spike which we recognized belonged to the Hachibi. We wasted no time and headed towards the direction it came from when we saw the Hachibi fighting against 4 people wearing black cloaks with red clouds on them. The messenger glanced upwards to see the Reikage waiting for him to continue. We were torn between watching or attempting to help B-sama out, but the former won out because we knew if we were to jump in we wouldn't be able to relay this info. Reikage-sama. Explain, the Reikage commanded, his patience wearing thin. Why yes, we were able to recognize one of the attackers as Uchiha Sasuke, missing Nin of Konoha. The Reikage blinked. Are you sure about this? The man nodded. Hi Reikage-sama, we saw the Uchiha symbol on his back and reports have told us Sasuke is the last Uchiha alive. We were unable to recognize anyone else from his group, but they weren't anyone too special aside from wearing the Akatsuki cloaks. I see, the Reikage grumbled as he clenched his fist before opening a drawer and retrieving a bingo book. Uchiha Sasuke. Here it is. Younger brother of Uchiha Itachi, the clan killer and previous member of Akatsuki, said to have been killed by Sasuke himself. He's currently wanted dead or alive by Konoha for the murder of their own Jinchuriki, Uzumaki Namikaze Naruto. He finished with surprise before bursting out with laughter. You, get me Omoi, Karui and Samui as I have a mission for them. Seeing how Konoha doesn't care about the last Uchiha, they will be more than happy to work with us or else risk a war. While you are at it, bring me Team 5, 8 and 12 as well, as I will be calling for a cage summit as the Akatsuki have gone too far by capturing my brother. I was willing to ignore it when Yugito was taken despite my brother's protest to get her back. But now they've gone too far. He slammed his hand on his desk, causing it to explode underneath the force as splinters flew through the room. Straightening himself, the scout gave a firm nod before quickly exiting the room. The Raikage sighed as he was left alone in his office. He was about to call in his secretary, Mabui, in order to get his desk replaced, but was stopped as an absolutely enormous amount of power washed over the village to the point that he himself had to hold himself up lest he would have fallen to his knees. Anbu, he immediately commanded, and no sooner than the words left his mouth, several figures could be seen kneeling in front of him. Orders, Raikage-sama, the apparent leader of the Anbu squad asked, looking up from his position. Get me Darui and see and tell him to meet me at the front gates in 5 minutes. We are heading to the source of the energy I'm sure even Suna had felt. Hi, the leader affirmed before they all left with a basis shunshin. Getting up, he put on his white haori before calling in his assistant. Raikage-sama, he saw her looking a bit shaky, no doubt from the earlier event, and couldn't blame her. Regardless of that, now was not the time to slack off. Mabui, Darui, see and I will be heading towards the source of the power we all felt a minute ago. When I get back I want my desk fixed, alright. Mabui glanced towards his desk to see it was indeed broken and nodded. Herr Raikage-sama, I will get right to it. Good. Make sure nothing happens while I'll be gone. With his piece said, he exited his office and headed to the front gate. Minutes earlier, something wrong? Naruto asked Tamamo as the two exited one of Naruto's many houses he had scattered throughout Japan. Each was at least a couple stories high and stood out by quite a lot, as they put the palaces belonging to several daimyo to shame. They had been given to him by Amaterasu herself, a payment of sorts if you will. Naruto had of course accepted when she had offered them to him, as they came with quite a lot of surrounding land that was now in his control. He had no interest in living in the underworld and neither did Tamamo, so it was quite nice to have several options available. Something about the air in the underworld being different compared to the human world made it hard for her to stay there for long amounts of time. Even the few hours they had been there 2 weeks ago visiting Syrex was more than enough for her. The fact that each of his castles, as that's what they really were, was surrounded by nature made it much more comfortable for Yukai to stay. Hearing her mumble something he couldn't quite understand, he stopped and turned to face her. Can you repeat that please? Moo. Tamamo pouted cutely. I asked when are we going to, she trailed off, blushing vividly. Sensing her embarrassment, he stepped closer to the blushing vixen and pulled her into a hug. She immediately returned the affectionate gesture, nuzzling her face against his chest like he would disappear were she to loosen her grip on him. Tamamo, Naruto asked, this time in a much softer tone. His eyes widened as she tilted her head back and noticed tears trickle down her cheeks. Her big amber eyes looking right at him, pleading almost, as they seemed to search for something in his own. He brought up his hand and softly cupped her cheek, Tamamo leaning into it the moment she felt him touch her face. What's wrong? Tell me please, you know I hate to see you cry. Hearing his words, Tamamo sniffled in an attempt to stop the tears from continuing to trickle down. She tried to turn her head to hide her tears but was stopped as Naruto kept his hand on her cheek. Her protests were silenced as Naruto planted his lips on her own. Amber eyes widened as she was caught off guard by the sudden intimate gesture. Eyes closed, he was unable to see her reaction as he poured all of the love he had for her into the kiss. He felt her body relax in his hold as she began kissing him back. He smiled slightly while he kept his lips sealed against hers. Breaking the kiss, he rested their foreheads together as his deep blue eyes peered into hers. Dry tears staining her otherwise unblemished pale skin, which he proceeded to clean as he rubbed his thumbs on both of her cheeks. Tamamo mumbled softly. Unable to hear what she said, Naruto leaned in closer, all while he kept softly rubbing her cheeks to keep her calm. Naruto stopped what he was doing for a moment as Tamamo whispered into his ear before leaning back and looking her right in her eyes. So that's what has been bothering you? Tamamo shyly nodded her head. After a moment at staring at the other, Naruto couldn't help it as he laughed, making Tamamo furrow her eyebrows in confusion as to why he was laughing. Hee. Sorry Tamamo-chan, but why did you never tell me this was bothering you? We've been together for more than a decade and never brought it up before, so I assumed we were practically married just without going through the process. Hearing his words, Tamamo's eyes widened as her tail halted its swaying. Though I guess it's partly my fault for bringing it up back then with Syrex, he looked down and chuckled sheepishly. So, you want us to get married, huh? A bright smile accompanied by a nod was his answer. I see. We should inform Amaterasu of this first, as I'm not good with this sort of stuff and she would be delighted to hear. It would be nice though, to be officially bonded to you. Tamamo surprised him as she jumped him, her arms locking around his neck while her legs intertwined themselves around his waist. Naruto's own hands rested on her thighs as he kept her up while she showered his face with kisses, her fluffy tail was energetically swishing back and forth. It's time. Naruto heard a voice speak from inside of his head. He barely had time to break the kiss. Wah! His wide-eyed stare met Tamamo's own before runes began forming beneath their feet, followed by a bright light that surrounded the two. When it died down, no one was there. The only signs someone was there were the scorch marks that were embedded into the ground. The fuck? Naruto groaned as he fell to his knees. His entire body hurt and he clenched his fist to calm himself. Luckily he felt his healing factor kick in shortly thereafter. Damn, it hurt even more than being hit with light spears belonging to fallen angels back during the war. His eyes then widened. Tamamo. His head snapped to the side where he could see her curled up holding her tail. Quickly standing up, he made his way over to her, ignoring the small winces he felt as his priority was someone else. He could see a bit of smoke coming off of her body and carefully turned her onto her back. He sighed in relief as she was still breathing, her own healing factor having begun healing her up. Still, Naruto delicately picked her up and moved her onto his lap before cradling her body. He could hear small whimpers escape her lips, which only made him hold her even closer, one of his hands softly brushing through her tail. Tapping the ground next to him, he watched as a magic circle briefly formed, followed by a wall of fire that surrounded the two. The reason for that was due to Naruto having no idea what had happened. One moment he heard a voice in his head speak, and then seconds later a glow surrounded him and Tamamo before he felt like his body was bathed with holy water as they reappeared in some sort of clearing. A rocky clearing, judging from the lack of plant life that was surrounding them. Satisfied with the barrier surrounding him, one that was even melting the rock into molten lava, his attention went back to Tamamo, whose breathing had returned to normal, a small smile adoring her face as she snuggled into him. Naruto frowned as he could sense numerous energy signatures heading towards his location. Weirdly enough, their energy felt much like Tamamo's own, yet at the same time very different. He wasn't worried though, as none of them were particularly strong. The highest he could sense was only around high class reserve-wise. Not too far away from Naruto's position, the Raikage along with his 2 guards and 2 squads of Anbu could be seen making their way towards the source of the power, which thankfully happened in Kaminari no Kuni. Alright, see, Darui, stay on guard as I can feel us getting closer. The Raikage commanded before moving his arm up to wipe away some sweat that had formed as the temperature seemed to have risen several degrees the closer they got. Hi Raikage-sama, the two said as they too removed some of the sweat that had begun to develop. Due to Kumogakure having a much colder climate than other villages, they were much quicker affected by things such as temperature rises, where even just a few degrees was already capable of making them sweat. There, the Raikage said as he along with the rest could see the large pillar of beautiful flickering crimson flames high up in the air. The Raikage along with his entourage came to a stop little over 24 feet away as the heat was close to unbearable. Their eyebrows rose as all of a sudden the fire changed colors from red to orange. Before he could say anything, a part of the wall of flames cleared up, and staring right at them was a pair of piercing cerulean blue eyes which held such intensity they couldn't help but become self-conscious. The Raikage sent the person he assumed responsible for the flames along with that enormous amount of power earlier felt a scrutinizing stare. The first thing that came to his mind was that the 4th Hokage had come back to life, but that was quickly thrown out the window as he noticed the blonde's hair wasn't as spiky as said man in question. The energy he could feel from the man was much different as well. It felt dark and oppressive, and there seemed to be no end to it. Sparing a glance at C, he saw that he was having trouble breathing as his senses were overwhelmed by this man. Raikage-sama, be careful, his power, I can't sense the end of it. He stuttered before he felt a calming hand was placed on his shoulder by Darui. Naruto watched the group through the flames. He didn't sense any hostility coming from them. Not that it would really matter, as with a snap of his fingers he could blow up the surrounding area for miles. So, with that, Naruto let the flames recede and they all got a proper look at the person responsible for them. Honestly, now that he got a good look of him, the Raikage found him looking very much like an older version of the deceased Kyuubi Jinchuriki. His spiky blonde hair that looked like it was kissed by the sun itself, along with deep blue eyes that were capable of staring right into your soul. His thick black robes gave him somewhat of a menacing look, coupled with the aura surrounding him was more than enough to be wary. They then noticed the woman in his arms and they all had to blink, curious as if they were imagining it. But no, what they were seeing was indeed real, and a curious expression could be seen on the Raikage along his 2 guards. The Anbu thankfully had masks that kept their expressions hidden, though it wasn't hard to imagine what they currently were. First thing they all saw was that the girl was beautiful. No, beautiful would be an understatement. She had unblemished pale skin which fitted very well with her peach pink hair that was done in twin tails and reached just past her shoulders. Her outfit gained their attention as well as it was both alluring and revealing, though it looked very nice on her. But what got their attention and the reason for their looks of disbelief were the 2 orange fox ears on top of her head, along with what they recognized as a bushy orange tail connected to her tailbone she was cuddling with. Who are you? Naruto asked after a moment. His eyes looked at them disinterested. Like they weren't even worth his time, which they really weren't. The large, bulky dark-skinned man took a step forward and Naruto assumed he was the leader, seeing how his aura was slightly different from the rest. I'm Yondaime Raikage of Kumogakure, Who are you and what business do you have in Kaminari no Kuni? Naruto blinked. Kaminari no Kuni. Naruto couldn't recall such a place existing. The people looked weird as well. Mainly those wearing animal masks to hide their identity. He did experience a slight stinging pain in the back of his head as he saw the headbands they wore, which held a metal plate and something was engraved onto them. Kaminari no Kuni. Never heard of it. Any of you know where Kyoto is? This time it was their turn to look confused. Kyoto. There's no such place here. Naruto's eyes widened slightly before he sighed and ran a hand through his spiky locks before he stood up with Tamamo in a bridal carry. The Anbu behind the raikage got in a defensive position as Naruto took a few steps closer. He could see that this man, the raikage, was a couple inches taller than he was, though he didn't let it bother him. I'm Naruto Bale and this is Tamamo no Mei, my fiancé. He smiled as he felt her snuggle deeper into him. And if I'm right about what has happened, then we're going to have a problem. Let the information given to him sink in. Naruto, that was the name of the now deceased Kyuubi Jinchuriki. Was it coincidence that this man in front of him looked very much like him? He wasn't sure. And then there was his fiancée who seemed to be asleep, her animal features attracting most of the attention from his men. Knew that if this man truly was the source of the energy he felt earlier, it would be best if he was able to convince him to follow them to Kumo. But before he was going to offer that, he needed some proof. Say, was it you that we felt all that power from? Naruto shrugged. Most likely. Why? If it is, I'd like you to follow us to Kumo where we can speak freely. Naruto narrowed his eyes as he could see what this man was trying to do. Though if he thought that would work, he had another thing coming. He had lived over a century and such things would not work on him. Very well. However, he quickly cut off their premature celebration. If anyone tries anything either to myself or Tamamo, we're going to have problems, understood? He followed up his words by releasing a healthy dose of killing intent that could easily freeze high-class devils in their place. He watched with thinly veiled amusement as the animal-masked men fell to their knees, followed up shortly by his two guards. The raikage himself had his eyes widen as he felt fear like no other. He released his own chakra in an attempt to fight back the urge to kneel like his own men were doing as the aura of pure death was slammed into him. Seconds later, but what felt to them more like an eternity, the oppressive aura was gone and left no trace behind, letting A release a deep breath as he understood how close to death he was at the moment. Behind him, Darui and C shakily got to their feet and helped up their Anbu comrades before shooting him wary glances. I see you understand. Though, to make sure you understand just how outclassed you really are, he averted his gaze to the rocky mountains that could be seen in the distance and snapped his fingers. The group from Kumo followed his gaze as they saw a large magic circle appear in the air, much to their shock. It glowed briefly before a thunderous explosion was heard as it shot down a pure beam of destruction, completely enveloping the mountain from their view. Even from where they stood, they could feel the earth rumble as shockwaves reached them. A moment later, the attack died down as the magic circle disappeared, leaving behind an enormous cloud of smoke which was quickly blown away by the wind. Their eyes widened and even the raikage was shocked as he looked at the result from the attack. Gone was the mountain along with several surrounding ones, and in its place was a several feet deep smoking crater. I can do that with a single snap of my fingers. If I put some actual effort in it, another magic circle formed, this one spanning several miles in length. Luckily for them, Naruto dismissed it, not wanting them to die from shock if they knew that even that barely affected his reserves. So I hope you understand what sort of problems we'll have should it come to it. A could only nod numbly as he realized that he was most likely standing in front of a man that could completely destroy his village, or any village for that matter, with a simple snap of his fingers. Why yes, follow me. Any other day one would look with absolute shock upon hearing the raikage of all people stutter. But those people did not see what they just did, that this man could single-handedly conquer the nations should he wishes so. Stares were sent their way as they entered Kumogakure. More stares than usual at least, though they weren't directed at the raikage, nor any of the shinobi surrounding the man. No, the stares were sent to the strange blonde male carrying a pink-haired fox girl in his arms. Naruto released a small amount of killing intent as he saw the lustful looks sent Tamamo's way from the males and his own from the women they passed. His attention then moved on to the village itself, which was quite interesting. Never before had he seen anything like it, as it was incorporating the mountains themselves in the structures. He smiled briefly as Tamamo let go of her tail and the appendage wrapped around one of his arms. He had sensed her waking up earlier but didn't comment further on it. If she wished to be carried, who was he to decline? He chuckled lightly as he heard some whispers as they passed, mostly about whether all her tail and ears were real or not. Naruto also noticed that the majority of the people here had darker skin, with a couple exceptions here and there. Where are we going? Naruto asked as they were led through numerous paths. His answer was in the form of a finger pointing towards the tallest tower he could see, which had the kanji for lightning on the front. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the architecture but kept quiet. If it works, don't fix it. His eyes caught several people, one adult leading a trio of kids hopping from mountain to mountain. It was quite impressive for humans, though he could sense they could use chakra, so he wasn't sure what to call them exactly. They certainly weren't yokai though. Shinobi, Darui, if he remembered correctly, had said. They were shinobi or ninjas, which had him stifle a chuckle as he recalled ninjas were supposed to be stealthy. He did wonder if he and Tamamo had ended up in some barbaric timeline, seeing as children as young as 12 were learning how to kill. He had done so as well, but he was a devil, and even that was out of the norm, as usually that was left to the older devils. They stopped walking and Naruto looked what the cause was, only to see it being a long flight of stairs. Not feeling like walking the whole way, wings made out of flames appeared on his back, alerting the shinobi nearby, though the Reikage halted him from doing anything stupid. "I'll wait up there." Not waiting for a reply, he jumped up and to the shock of those present levitated midair. Sending those back on the ground an amused stare, he flapped his wings once, which was enough to land on top of the big tower before moving to where the entrance was at. Faster than expected, he was met by the Reikage, who had made it up there as well, making him think there was more than meets the eye with these humans. Well, them being capable of using chakra was already intriguing. "Follow me." The Reikage passed him and entered the building. Using his sensing skill, he got a good feel for how many people were inside and where they exactly were before following after the man. They were led inside a large office which had a rather nice view overlooking the village below them. A gestured for them to take a seat, which he did. He woke up Tamamo, who was still sitting in his lap, by lightly tapping her naked thigh, allowing the Reikage to see her large amber eyes, which began looking around with childlike curiosity. "So, why did you bring us here?" Naruto asked as he absent-mindedly brushed his fingers through Tamamo's tail, which had distracted A for a brief moment. "Well, I'm going to get straight to it, Naruto-san, and that is who or what are you? You apparently weren't aware of Kaminari no Kuni despite being one of the 5 great shinobi countries. On top of that, the power you displayed is quite honestly frightening, yet no one had heard of you. One simply does not stay in the shadows for so long, especially not someone with as much power as yourself. So I ask again, who are you?" Naruto hummed softly as he looked at the bulky man, who was leaned forward slightly, interested in what he was going to tell. "Tell you what, how about we make a deal?" "A deal?" Naruto nodded. "Yup. I tell you who I am and where I'm from, regardless of how crazy it'll sound to someone such as yourself, and in return I need to get up to date with this world." A didn't miss how he said, "this world," which made him all the more curious. Seeing no reason to decline, he accepted, earning a smile from both Naruto and Tamamo. Very well. He adjusted himself to a more comfortable position, as this was going to take quite a while, never once stopping with petting Tamamo's tail. "My story starts a little over 128 years ago on the day of my birth." A's eyes threatened to escape his sockets as he heard that and knew he was in for something else.